Chapter 280, Interview. Lord clearly understands that our clan does not lack silver. However, our face cannot be ruined in the slightest. His wife sitting across from him said a smile. She embodied the image of a perfect wife. When Qin Yan saw this, he was completely satisfied. This third madam had followed him for so many years, but her consideration for finer details hadn't decreased in the slightest, causing him to feel more reassured in them. Even ordinary matters of all sizes with regards to the Qin residents were handed over to her. Furthermore, her orders were always extremely satisfactory. Lord, I have already sent people to fetch him. After Lord Husband sees him, I will handle this small matter. His wife continued, speaking with a gentle voice. When Qin Yan heard this, he faintly smiled, but when he thought to say something else, a servant made a report from outside the room. Lord Qin Ping has brought the guest. Do you want to call him in now? Tell Qin Ping to bring him in. Without deeply thinking, Qin Yan gave his command and simply closed his mouth. He then gave an apologetic smile to his third wife. I will follow your orders. The servant agreed and spoke no further. Qin Ping entered the guest hall with a simple-minded youth following behind him. As this male youth walked in, he looking left to right in the guest receiving hall as if he were extremely curious about within it. When the two walked into the hall, Qin Ping made his report and automatically withdrew. The only one who remained was the youth restlessly facing Qin Yan and his wife. When Qin Yan and his third wife saw the youth's bewildered expression, she couldn't help but look at him with a knowing smile. Qin Yan lightly coughed and then amiably said to the youth, I've heard this little brother has a letter for Senior Qin. Is this matter true? Could you hand that letter over to me so I could take a look? The youth, Han Li, looked at the Qin clan master and revealed some hesitation. With a bit of uncertainty, he asked, Are you really Uncle Qin? My grandfather said from his own mouth that this letter could only be given to Uncle Qin himself. When the third wife heard Han Li's words, she was slightly startled but soon smiled, almost unable to restrain her laughter. Inside the main guest receiving hall of the Qin residence, how could anyone dare to arrogantly pretend to be the Qin clan master? This youngster's question was truly amusing. When Qin Yan heard this, he blankly stared for a moment before revealing a wry smile. With no better option, he could only say, This one is the genuine Qin clan master. However, whether or not I am your esteemed self's Uncle Qin, I must read the letter before I know. Qin Yan appeared to be beaten, much to the amusement of his third wife watching from the side. Within Yuejing, nearly no one did not know of the renowned master of the Qin clan. But who would have thought this rustic younger would have actually have doubts? It truly made for a good story. Having heard Qin Yan's words, confidence bubbled forth on Han Li's face, and he brought out the crinkled letter, quickly creasing it before handing it over to Qin Yan. Qin Yan, who had long lost his patience, had difficulty resisting the urge to go over and snatch the letter, but managed to maintain his poise until he received it. However, he didn't immediately open up the letter. Instead, he took a deep look at Han Li and suddenly put the letter on the table, lightly clapping his hands 2 times. Clap, clap. An old man with a head full of white hair walked into the hall, wearing an azure jacket. Without saying anything further, Qin Yan pointed to the letter. The old man then immediately advanced towards the letter. He brought the letter under a bright light and carefully observed it. In the end, he returned the letter to the table. There are no problems. After spitting out these words, the old man bowed and retreated. He hadn't made a single noise this entire time, as if he were a ghost. Feeling assured, Qin Yan faintly squinted at Han Li, and when he saw Han Li's baffled expression, he couldn't help but smile. Then, without any further doubt, he skillfully opened the letter and took out the letter for a close look. When the third wife saw this, she gave Han Li friendly smiles. She then raised a teacup in front of her, wanting to take a sip. However, before the cup even touched her lips, she saw Qin Yan pant as he read the letter. He suddenly stood with a face filled with extreme and bizarre amazement. Lord, what's the matter? Could it be the letter is fake? The third wife was shocked, hastily putting down her teacup and asked with great concern. No, this letter is genuine. Furthermore, it is a letter from my senior to whom I owe great favor. Qin Yan's expression returned to normal almost instantly, his tone of voice once again quite calm. Then he looked at his beloved wife as if there was nothing wrong and sized up Han Li. Your esteemed self is called Han Li, Lord Qin inquired. Although his tone was the same as before, the third wife somehow felt something was amiss. Just as this madam met with doubt, Han Li nodded with all his strength, "That's right, I am Han Li. Is it as my grandpa has said? Can I stay here?" Of course. When I was a child, I saw Elder Li Huayuan with my father. I did not think that today I would see his descendant. I will treat you as if you were my own nephew." Qin Yan suddenly gave a hearty laugh. His loud and clear voice caused the nearby servants to look at each other in dismay. They did not know why their clan master was so happy within the guest hall. "Come, accompany with me a nearby room and tell me how Elder Li Huayuan is doing. As for the others, they are not allowed to follow. My dear nephew Han Li and I will have a proper chat." Qin Yan grabbed Han Li's arm and said this cordially. Then he dragged Han Li to the side door and blocked his third wife, who had also wanted to follow. This caused his third wife to feel greatly shocked and confused. She could only helplessly look on at Lord Qin and Han Li as they left through the side door. However, she didn't dare to disobey and secretly follow them. At this moment, she had a head full of doubt and suspicion. Han Li followed Qin Yan, and they arrived at an extremely quiet side hall. Without saying anything further, Qin Yan turned an ancient vase that was decorating the hall. Soon after, a concealed room suddenly appeared from the wall. When Qin Yan saw this, he entered without the slightest hesitation. After Han Li faintly smiled for a moment, he followed him in. Although the concealed room wasn't very large, it was fully furnished. Not only were there desks and chairs, but there was also a bookshelf about 3 meters high within the room. The room appeared extremely refined. "Since your esteemed self came from Immortal Li's sect, then you should be a cultivator. Just now in the guest hall I was extremely rude. I hope Immortal Han won't blame me." When Qin Yan sealed off the secret room, he apologized to Han Li with a respectful expression. "It was nothing. I can't blame those who didn't know. Besides, this act will have to continue." After Han Li casually sat down in the chair next to him, he said this without much care. At this moment, his appearance completely changed and resumed his confident, easy bearing. "Many thanks to Lord Immortal's magnanimity." When Qin Yan heard this, he grew even more respectful. He then stood at the side and didn't reveal the slightest dissatisfaction. After all, what did it mean to be an immortal cultivator? Qin Yan clearly understood this. They were living legends equivalent to gods. Even more, without the help of that immortal Li, his Qin clan absolutely wouldn't have been as illustrious and prestigious as it was today. In heart and appearance, Qin Yan didn't dare to be disrespectful in the slightest. "Why don't you sit, Qin clan master? There is no need to be overly polite. The immortal Li you spoke of is actually my own master, so you can't be considered a stranger to the Li clan." Han Li answered with a smile. "I do not dare. This one is but a mortal. How could I be disrespectful to an immortal? This one will stand to the side and listen to Immortal Han's commands." Qin Yan repeatedly waved his hand, refusing to sit down. This caused Han Li to thoughtfully mutter to himself for a moment, but he did not further press him. "I do not know what brings Immortal Han to this place. Immortal Li's letter only mentioned your identity as an immortal. The letter didn't mention any specific matters. Could you please inform me about a thing or two?" Qin Yan carefully asked the question he was most concerned with. His father had explained to him before he passed away that Immortal Li, who greatly favored the Qin clan, would only appear when there was danger, personally bringing his fellow sect members to provide assistance. But what danger had the Qin clan come across now? Han Li looked at him and saw that the Qin clan's master appeared worried. After another moment of thought, he said with deliberation, "The matter is as such. It involves the cultivators of foreign countries. We received information that—" With an ordinary expression, Han Li slowly narrated to Qin Yan how the 6 Devil Dao sects would likely act against the Qin clan, by using terms that a mortal would most likely understand. This greatly shocked the Qin clan master. After half a day, Qin Yan finally stuttered out, "This, the cultivators of other countries want to act against us mortals. How is this good?" This Qin clan master was at a total loss of what to do. Han Li faintly smiled and calmly comforted him. There is no need for the Qin clan master to be worried. The cultivators infiltrating into the state of Yue have low magic power. Under my watch, they won't be able to easily act against your clan. Chapter 280, The Qin Residents and Young Madame Bio. Chapter 281, The Qin Residents and Young Madame Bio. After 2 hours had passed, Han Li left the secret room with Qin Yan, once again returning to his country bumpkin appearance. Having returned to the guest room, the Qin clan master looked at his third wife and immediately ordered them to arrange a clean room in the back of the residence. as honorable nephew Han would be staying with them for an extended time. The surface reason was plain. As his senior, the Lord wanted to cultivate this junior and pay back the kindness that the boy's elders had bestowed upon him. When the third wife saw this, her jaw dropped, but she didn't say any words of opposition. When the exceedingly shrewd woman clearly heard this, she knew that Qin Yan already made his decision and wouldn't change his mind. Furthermore, she could perceive that this honorable nephew Han had something suspicious going on with her lord husband. But since Qin Yan didn't tell any of the particulars, she naturally wouldn't perform any actions that would provoke disfavor. However, she had guessed with a bit of wild imagination that since he was so serious toward this honorable nephew Han, it was possible that when Qin Yan was young, he had left an illegitimate child while he was out fondling flowers and trampling grass. How else could he turn so pale from reading the letter and be so cordial right after? The more the lively-minded third wife thought of this, the greater she felt this to be true. She felt a bit unhappy, but she appeared as if nothing happened and acted increasingly familiar toward Han Li. As such, under Lord Qin's repeated suggestions, Han Li followed Qin Ping to see his residence until he was fully satisfied. This time, Qin Ping's expression wasn't as rigid as before. Instead, his face wore a smile as he continuously addressed him as young Master Han. He had selectively forgotten his previously cold behavior. Although Han Li appeared overwhelmed by a superior's favor, he secretly sighed to this mortal servant. His art of changing in the direction of the blowing wind was truly superb. He was unexpectedly able to switch from arrogance to deference without the slightest appearance of embarrassment. He didn't know whether to say that his face was thick-skinned, or if he was long accustomed to such events. Soon after, Qin Ping brought Han Li on a small path to the back of the residence. They arrived at a peaceful three-room courtyard. The exquisite and refined surroundings were exceptionally peaceful, causing Han Li to inwardly nod his head. It was very much to his liking. It seems this Qin Yan had gone through quite a bit of thought to give him such a suitable dwelling. Young Master Han, this is your residence. This is the best courtyard within the Qin residence. If someone were not the Lord's valued guests, they basically wouldn't be allowed to live here. After Qin Ping let Han Li into the courtyard, he fawningly gave Han Li an explanation. Han Li scratched his head and naively grinned. He repeatedly giggled as if he didn't know what to say. With great tact, Qin Ping switched to a different subject. Young Master Han hasn't eaten dinner yet, no. This servant will go to the kitchen and bring you some food. Please wait for a moment. With that said, Qin Ping respectfully withdrew from the courtyard and left. As Han Li saw this person gradually grow farther, he faintly smiled and entered the rooms. The room's arrangements greatly matched the environment, each piece of furniture being uniquely elegant. After he went through it once through, Han Li found it increasingly agreeable. He couldn't help but think of who arranged the place like this. That Qin Ping had moved quite quickly. Not long after, a female servant arrived with a large bamboo tray holding food. Smelling the fragrant scent of food, Han Li, who had fasted for several years, felt a bit ravenous and impolitely swept clear the several delicate dishes with a bowl of rice. In the end, Qin Ping saw what remained of the meal and naturally found it a bit funny, but his appearance still remained respectful as he invited Han Li to the hall. Lord Qin wanted to introduce Han Li to the members of the Qin residence. When Han Li arrived at the guest hall for the second time, it wasn't just Qin Yan and the third madam. There were also 20 to 30 men and women sitting and standing about. When Qin Yan called out Han Li to sit beside him with great familiarity, a few of the older members within the hall were surprised, but the others didn't react. The young madams and lords of the Qin clan, however, were unable to keep their calm. The more favored young master immediately asked with dissatisfaction, "Grandfather, who is this brother? Us brothers and sisters have never seen him before. Could you have called us here because of this person?" Qin Yan naturally heard the unhappiness in his grandson's voice, but he didn't give him any face, instead glaring at him before saying coldly, "Get back, do you have the right to speak in this place? What this person, that person? This is Han Li, my honorable nephew Han. His elder has bestowed our Qin clan with great favor during a time of life and death. You are forbidden from being disrespectful to him." This sentence from Qin Yan instantly caused everyone in the room apart from his third wife to cause a commotion. Various conjectures and curious gazes simultaneously landed on Han Li, who wore a perfect unsettled appearance, shifting around a few times as if needles were being poked into his rear. As for the Qin clan's young master, he silently retreated, his face alternating between frightened red and embarrassed red. He absolutely did not expect that Qin Yan, who normally doted on him, would now speak so mercilessly towards him. This caused him to lose a lot of face in front of so many brothers and sisters. Because of this matter, this young master naturally would not have any goodwill towards Han Li. Of course, he was not so naive that he would make any ill-intentioned moves towards Han Li, especially after Qin Yan had given such orders. After all, it seemed like this country bumpkin had a very high standing in his grandfather's heart. He didn't wish to lose Qin Yan's favor because of this matter. With this person set as an example, other people naturally would not make any hostile movements. Instead, many people revealed kind appearances after meeting Han Li's gaze. At this time, Qin Yan pointed out and introduced all the people in the room to Han Li with a smile. This is my eldest son Qin Jai, who is currently helping me organize all of the business in Yuejing. He has a pretty good head on him. This is my second son. Even as Han Li pretended to wildly nod his head, he secretly memorized every Qin clan member that Qin Yan introduced. After all, these people were the ones that he needed to protect. However, this elderly Lord Qin could really procreate. In total, he had 5 sons and 3 daughters, and he even had quite a few grandsons and granddaughters. In their midst, the eldest and second son all seemed to be around 30 years old and even had families. The one who had taken the initiative to ask a question was the eldest son's second son. But what was funny was that Qin Yan's youngest 5th son was only 5 or 6 years old, a little child who could only suck his thumb. When Han Li thought about that 16 or 17-year-old youth being forced to call this child with a drippy nose 5th uncle, he felt that it was quite comical. As for Qin Yan's wives, apart from the 3rd wife he had met earlier in the morning, there was another 40-year-old or so second wife, as well as 7 or 8 relatively young concubines. Qin Yan's first wife was not in the hall. At the moment, it was said that she was praying to Buddha and abstaining from eating meat. She would no longer come out to see anyone. Apart from these people, there were 2 40-year-old or so males. Naturally, they were Qin Yan's 2nd and 3rd younger brothers. They were each responsible for a portion of the Qin clan's business and could be considered the more important members of the Qin clan. Of course, they likewise had a few sons and daughters in the room, but Han Li only memorized these people's names, too lazy to pay them any further attention. After all, the energy he possessed as one person was limited. He could only focus on protecting the people Qin Yan introduced in this room. Yi, where is young Madame Bio? When Qin Yan introduced all the people inside the room once, he suddenly discovered that they were missing a person. He couldn't help but ask this to his 3rd wife sitting beside him. Lord, young Miss Bio felt that as a widow, it would not be too appropriate for her to meet any outsiders, and thus she didn't come. Should I go and call for her? The 3rd wife softly asked. A hesitant expression appeared on her face. Oh, Qin Yan thought for a moment before continuing. Don't worry about it. Marshal Nephew Han is not an outsider. It's best if she comes and sees him. Yes, my lord. Little lion, go quickly and call for the young Miss Bio. Tell her that the lord asked for her to come. The 3rd wife indifferently commanded a young maid standing behind her. Yes, madam. This little maidservant who previously guided Han Li immediately and quickly ran out through a side door with small steps. At this time, Qin Yan turned his head around and said in a low voice to Han Li, "There's one more person who didn't come, a young woman whom my first wife saved 7 or 8 years ago while she was visiting her parents. This woman is extremely pitiful. Not only did she lose her memory because she hit her head, her body was covered with wounds. My wife's character is pretty good, so after treating her and seeing that the girl had no place to go, she had one of her brothers take her in as an adopted daughter, at least providing her with some shelter. However, this woman truly is unlucky. Although she was married to a groom picked by her adoptive father, she was only married for 3 days before her spouse actually slipped and fell into a river because he was too drunk. It's reasonable to say that such a young woman would naturally choose to remarry, but this woman actually has the temperament to die chaste and decided to live as a widow for the husband whom she only lived for 3 days with. This is a hot topic around here, but it has given my wife's clan a great amount of face. Afterwards, her adoptive father passed away due to sickness. My wife, seeing that the truly pitiful young lady was watching over an empty house all alone, decided to bring her over here to accompany her. In passing, she would also ease this woman's anxiety." As Qin Yan spoke, he sighed incessantly. Chapter 282, Transformation. Chapter 282, Transformation. When Han Li heard Qin Yan's words, although he appeared shocked, he rather disapproved. He felt that most of the time, these pitiful women were led astray by tales of noble women who didn't remarry. When the young masters within the hall heard that young Madame Bio was coming, they all incessantly whispered with happy expressions as anticipation appeared in their eyes. This surprised Han Li, but he soon came to the realization that this young Madame Bio must be a beauty as delicate as a flower and as refined as jade. Just as Han Li thought this, a young maid and a young woman dressed in white arrived at the guest hall. Although this woman had beautiful long and light eyebrows and seemed extremely gentle and quiet, she also emitted an indescribable fiery charm from head to toe, giving her a lovely and emotionally stirring bearing. When a majority of men looked at her, they all felt an urge to hold her in their embrace and show tender love for her. As immature and inexperienced youngsters, they continuously gave her fierce gazes with wide eyes. It seemed that this young Madame Bio had been the target of the Qin clan young masters for quite some time. However, when Han Li clearly saw this woman's appearance, shock flashed through his eyes. The foolish and dull expression on his face suddenly disappeared. Fortunately, Han Li was able to suppress his heart a moment later and restored his original appearance. Because this transformation happened in less than a second, and everyone in the hall was gazing at the young woman, his secret hadn't been revealed. At this moment, Han Li's heart resembled constantly broiling storm. The appearance of young Madame Bio had greatly changed from before, and the young woman's grace had slightly changed as well. However, from the intelligence flowing through her eyes and her delicate oval face, Han Li recognized this young Madame Bio with just a single look. She was one of the few faces he had seen at the Mo estate several years ago, the graceful young woman who lived to research the art of healing, Mo Fenggu. When Mo Fenggu entered the room, everyone saw her face slightly redden, and she lowered her head as she walked. Naturally, she did not see Han Li, who sat next to Qin Yan. When Qin Yan saw his juniors acting unbecoming of themselves, he grew extremely annoyed. Cough, cough. His face tightened, and after coughing several times more, the young men who were absorbed in Mo Fenggu's beauty woke up and retracted their gazes one after another, assuming the appearance of upright gentlemen. They feared they had angered their clan master. Pinger, sit next to your aunt. The third wife thought to hurriedly call out, having Mo Fenggu sit at her side. Thank you, third aunt. Mo Fenggu gently said a word of thanks and neatly walked to the side of the third wife, sitting down upright. Pinger, don't stay in your room all the time. It's bad for living people. It's much better to walk around outside. It was obvious Qin Yan found Mo Fenggu very pitiful as his tone was very mild. Many thanks to uncle, Pinger understands, Mo Fenggu docilely replied without raising her head. Sigh. When Qin Yan saw this, he softly sighed. Although this adopted daughter obediently responded every time once she returned, she would continue as always. Qin Yan was helpless. Then he thought to continue on with proper business and introduced Han Li to Mo Fenggu. Pinger, I've had you come here to introduce you to someone. This is Han Li, my dear nephew Han. He is the descendant of a senior who has done our family a great kindness. Come take a look at him. In the future, make sure to get along with this elder brother of yours. Han Li was fully focused on Mo Fenggu's movements. When this woman heard the words Han Li, her body slightly trembled and her heart immediately beat faster. After a long while, Mo Fenggu slowly raised her head, revealing her beautiful face. At this moment, that the emotionally touching sereness of her beauty and her almond lips touched together, leaving a faint reply, "Hello, dear brother Han." It seemed as if Mo Fenggu truly did not remember Han Li. After hearing her pay her respects to Han Li, it seemed as if he were stunned by her lovely appearance. He finally said, "Hello, dear sister," with much difficulty. This caused the young spectators to the side to smile and laugh without end. Qin Yan coldly swept his eyes past them, and it immediately grew quiet. Han Li then dim-wittedly scratched his head and appeared at a loss of what to do. The following matters were much more simple. Qin Yan coldly proclaimed to the many people of his household that Han Li would be staying at the Qin residence for some time. During this time, he would assume the role of a young master of the Qin residence, making it forbidden for others to slight him, else there would be heavy punishment. When those words were spoken, those of Qin residents started looking at Han Li with a peculiar gaze. At this moment, it wasn't just the third wife who was guessing at Han Li's and Qin Yan's true relationship. At night, Han Li was lying down on his room's bed without sleeping. He was looking at the roof, as if he were worried about something. Ping ping, the sound of 2 light knocks came from outside the room. Han Li, who hadn't fallen asleep, slightly raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a mysterious smile. Han Li then calmly stood up and opened the room door. Outside the room stood a woman concealed by a cloak. When this woman saw Han Li open the door, she immediately dropped her hood, revealing her lovable appearance. This was Mo Fengwu, who had pretended to not recognize Han Li earlier that day. When Han Li saw this, he silently moved his body to the side. Mo Fengwu then walked in without the slightest hesitation. Han Li stood at the door and released his spiritual sense. He didn't discover anybody within the vicinity. It seemed that Mo Fengwu had been careful when she came here. He softly closed the door and turned his head. He saw Mo Fengwu had silently undone her cloak, revealing her ample and alluring dainty body. Then, with no trace of politeness, she sat on the side of the bed, expressionlessly looking at Han Li. Han Li sighed. Apart from her appearance, he truly found it difficult to draw a connection between this cold and detached woman and his impression of that gentle young woman who loved the healing. Her experiences these past many years had transformed her into a greatly unfamiliar person. Should I address you as Junior Marshal Brother Han or Dear Brother Han? A displeased expression flashed through her eyes as she coarsely asked this. Call me Han Li, young lady Fengwu, Han Li leisurely said as he restrained his thoughts. After hearing Han Li's words, Mo Fengwu's face flashed with disappointment. But soon after, she said with a relaxed appearance, I don't know why young Master Han, an immortal cultivator, arrived here at the Qin residence, and I also don't care to know these secrets. I came here only to ask young master to kill one of Fengwu's foes out of respect for your relationship with my father as your master. When she said this, Mo Fengwu was incapable of maintaining her cold and detached appearance. She nervously looked at Han Li, fearing that Han Li would refuse. Han Li's expression had remained the same all along, but he did not immediately decline. Instead, he picked up a pot of fragrant tea that had finished steeping and silently poured Mo Fengwu a cup. Then he slowly said a few words that shocked the woman. Could it be the person you want me to kill is the sect master of the Rainbow Sect? After Han Li took a seat across from Mo Fengwu and unhurriedly said this, he took a neutral glance at her shocked, beautiful appearance. Mo Fengwu's shock quickly faded away. She looked at Han Li with a strange gaze several times. After a long while, she bitterly said, It seems Junior Marshal Brother Han already knew of this matter with the Mo estate. It's true that nothing can be concealed from you immortal cultivators. Although Mo Fengwu said these words softly, Han Li heard a trace of hidden resentment within them. Furthermore, this resentment was unexpectedly directed toward him. After a moment of consideration, Han Li understood why she was like this. Afterwards, he lightly chuckled and explained, It seems that young Lady Fengwu has misunderstood. Regardless of how this one says it, he does have a friendship with the Mo estate. If I had truly known the Mo estate was experiencing a catastrophe, at the very least, I would have let the martial mothers escape unscathed and allow them to live the rest of their years in peace. As for other matters, it would be hard to say. As Han Li explained, he became extremely sincere. He was not fearful of Mo Fengwu holding grudges against him. However, Han Li couldn't unload the cause of this obscure injustice onto himself. When Mo Fengwu heard Han Li's words, she only said, Oh. Her face resumed her cold and detached appearance. Han Li didn't know whether this woman had truly believed his explanation just now. When Han Li saw this, he shook his head, and after a moment of hesitation, he could only inform her of the truth. Originally, because of the truth's connection with the world of immortal cultivators, he had been reluctant to tell her. In truth, this matter with the Mo estate's misfortune was told me to by the girl Kei-Huan. She is currently together with Fourth Martial Mother. What? You're saying that Kei-Huan and Fourth Mother are still alive? After Mo Fengwu heard this, she grew excited and found it hard to believe. 2 red blushes appeared on her pure white face from the excitement. Of course they're alive. To say they are currently living at an exceptionally concealed location wouldn't be wrong, Han Li softly added. In truth, after he escaped Yanling Castle, he made some inquiries about the circumstances of the mortals at Yanling Castle after the Yan clan left. In the end, the castle had become deserted, so the mortals took advantage of this, leaving Yanling Castle. Afterwards, all traces of that mother and daughter vanished. TL, the Mo's Fearsome Flood Dragon Association had 2 direct competitors, the Hegemon's Villa and the Rainbow Sect. Han Li was previously sent to kill the Hegemon's Villa sect master for an antidote to Dr. Mo's poison before he went to the Great South Trade Meet. Chapter 283 Old Affections. Chapter 283 Old Affection. And Li felt that if he told Mo Fengwu that Mo Keihyun and her mother had disappeared, he would be telling her far too much. So long as Mo Fengwu knew that her family still lived in this world, that was enough. Whether or not this girl would be able to meet with Mo Keihyun and her mother depended on the world. And Li then briefly recounted the events of how he came across Mo Keihyun, causing Fengwu to nearly cry tears of joy. Mo Fengwu clearly understood that because of Han Li's identity as an immortal cultivator, he didn't need to fabricate such lies to deceive such a weak girl as herself. The reason why the other party was being so polite to her was most likely due to that fated meeting with him so many years ago. Thus, Mo Fengwu brought her hands together in joy and raised them to her chest, silently praying for a moment before returning to her normal state. However, her expression toward Han Li was clearly no longer as cold as before. She clearly realized that in all likelihood, were it not for Han Li's assistance at Yan Ling Castle, Lady Yan and her daughter would still be in a predicament. Many thanks to young Master Han telling me about the whereabouts of Keihyun and Fourth Mother. After Mo Keihyun calmed down, she slowly gave her thanks. But without waiting for Han Li to reply, she said, "Although my younger sister and her mother are all right, the whereabouts of my eldest sister and my other mothers are unknown. They've most likely fallen to some evil scheme. Fengwu cannot help but want to avenge them. However, Fengwu lacks the strength. Can junior martial brother Han help me?" Mo Fengwu's words revealed a feeble appearance. A layer of fog covered her eyes in an instant, as if she were about to sob from grief. When Han Li saw this, he stoked his nose and felt a headache. He originally thought that if she knew of Mo Keihyun and her mother's whereabouts, she wouldn't be so anxious to take revenge. But he didn't think that Mo Fengwu, whom he hadn't seen for so many years, would become too strongly attached to this matter. To tell the truth, killing a chi condensation cultivator would be far easier than killing a mortal with status for no reason. And Li learned the reason why after he entered Yellow Maple Valley. It turned out that all the many provinces of the state of Yue had been clearly divided between several large clans and the 7 great sects. So long as a powerhouse of great influence had existed for some time within a province, cultivators would secretly pay some attention to them. Some would even be provided assistance from cultivators. Originally, the land province's Mo estate and the hegemon's villa were new and developing powers. Thus, they weren't contacted by cultivators. Else, when Han Li was sent to kill the hegemon's villa's Aoyang Facian, how could he have gotten away so easily without being investigated? However, the Rainbow Sect was different. That sect had been established more than 100 years ago and was regarded to be ancient. Thus, the Spirit Beast Mountain of the 7 great sects, the controller of the land province, tacitly approved of them. The shadow of Spirit Beast Mountain was most likely looming behind them. As a result, when the Mo estate fought against them, they suffered great defeat. As a disciple of Yellow Maple Valley, he couldn't kill a major mortal leader supported by another sect for no cause or reason. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. However, with the recent invasion of the state of Yue by the Devil Dao, the secular world had suffered damage. This gave him a good opportunity to act during this time of crisis. With just a bit of carefulness, he shouldn't have any problems. As Han Li thought this, he didn't expose any emotions. Instead, he stood up and paced back and forth within the room. After another moment of consideration, he gazed at Mo Fengwu's charming face and calmly said, "Young Lady Fengwu, normally I wouldn't be able to agree to this request since doing so would bring about great problems for me. But the recent circumstances in the cultivation world are quite peculiar. An opportunity might actually arrive. Let's do it like this. If there's an opportunity in the future, I will attempt to eliminate the Rainbow Sect's master. But if it is truly impossible, I hope young Lady Fengwu will extinguish her thoughts for revenge." When Mo Fengwu heard Han Li's words, she immediately began crying tears of joy. Seeing her bright and beautiful crying beauty caused Han Li to become despondent for a moment. The year he first saw Mo Fengwu, he was quite moved by that sweet-tempered second young madam of the Mo estate. To this day, that memory still gave him a kind and warm, pleasant feeling, causing him to recall it fondly. That was the first time he felt feelings of romantic passion. This small promise was none other than a show of affection. Despite this thought, his appearance was the same as always. He planned to bury this emotion deeply in his heart and no longer speak of it again. From Han Li's agreement, Mo Fengwu eventually looked over to him with happiness. Her face was filled with appreciation. She didn't say anything further and walked toward Han Li. Suddenly, she pressed her soft and fragrant lips lightly against his face. Then, with a bashful and slightly perplexed expression, she said, "With Junior Marshal Brother Han's promise, even if you can't kill that person, Fengwu cannot thank you enough." After saying this, the young woman silently donned her cloak and hurriedly left his room. Han Li touched the spot on his face where he had been kissed with an odd expression. Not long after, he held his chin with a single hand and sunk into deep thought for a very long time. At daybreak on the second day, Han Li woke up from Qi refining meditation and thought of the events that happened last night. He couldn't help but inwardly sigh. If Mo Fengwu also possessed spiritual roots, he would definitely introduce her to Yellow Maple Valley and cultivate the Great Tao as her Tao companion. With this thought, Han Li washed his face and walked out of the room. He intended to become familiar with the layout of the Qin residence and then further consider his other matters. But he didn't think that just as he walked out, he would discover the smiling Qin Ping in the courtyard. Without waiting for Han Li's astonished inquiries, he quickly stepped forward and explained. This one was ordered by Lord Qin to serve as young master's personal servant for the time being. In the future, if young master Han requires any errands to be done, do not hesitate to tell me. As Qin Ping spoke to Han Li, his expression was respectful and excited. His thoughts were quite simple. Although this young master Han came from a small region and people wouldn't see him as very bright, this person was at the center of the Lord's eye and held the Lord's complete favor. Besides, if he served this young master well, perhaps he might also invite the Lord's favor. As Qin Ping thought this and made his own selfish calculations, he constantly looked down at this young country bumpkin master with disdain, especially when he first heard he was to be his servant. Qin Ping had already been told by a madam's maid that this was most likely to be the Lord's illegitimate child. So long as the Lord lived, who would dare to treat this young master unfairly? Also, how long he would follow young Master Han was a matter that would depend on how the tides changed. This would raise his position far faster than running errands for the third madam. Han Li naturally didn't know of this person's true thoughts, instead feeling only that Qin Ping conducted himself in accordance to Qin Yan's wishes. He knew he was unfamiliar toward Yuejing and the Qin residence, so having this person immediately come to guide him was quite timely. Just as Han Li thought this, he couldn't help but reveal a smile. Then he bluntly said to Qin Ping, "I haven't yet seen a large portion of these buildings, so I want to take a look around. How about you accompany me?" "Yes, young master." Given his first assignment, Qin Ping enthusiastically answered. As such, Han Li had Qin Ping lead the way and strolled around the huge Qin residence. Although he spoke of the women's quarters, it wasn't suitable for Han Li to see them up close. Even so, when people saw them pointing it out from a distance, they didn't dare to say any gossip. After all, Qin Yan's previous words affected the entire Qin residence. This is the second Master Fugui's courtyard. Apart from the second lord, his two youngest sons also live there. Neighboring that, Qin Ping guided Han Li quite well. Unbeknownst to him, Han Li secretly committed every name that Qin Ping told Han Li as well as where each master lived. But when he spoke of young Madame Bio Mo Fengwu's residence, Han Li's mind stirred. He paused and looked at it for quite a long time before turning his head away. Not a long time after, Han Li finished looking through the Qin residence once through, but somehow it seemed that Han Li was not yet content. In the end, he bluntly had Qin Ping bring him out of the Qin residence and out to a lively place in Yuejing. As they wandered randomly, Qin Ping continued to give him explanations. The entire morning passed by as they walked through a few scenic spots in Yuejing. Qin Ping's originally enthusiastic expression had long disappeared. At this moment, he was limping behind Han Li with a bitter face. Who would have thought that even after walking for so many hours without the slightest amount of rest, he would still be forced to continue to comment and explain without end? Anybody would feel similarly frustrated in this situation. Qin Ping even went as far as to suspect whether or not he had chosen the wrong master. Chapter 284, Whispered Discussion. Although Qin Ping was a servant within the Qin residence, he would normally call a carriage whenever he went outside. He had never traveled so far on foot as he had today. This tormented him by no small amount. Qin Ping could feel his two heels faintly bruising, and his feet felt like they were pincushions being pricked. Not to mention that his throat had long become hoarse from talking too much. However, when he saw his own new master was greatly interested by a small porcelain store and continued on to look in every direction, he could only grit his teeth and reluctantly follow. After all, he couldn't tell his master that he was tired. How could a servant such as he dare to complain? "I'm a bit hungry. Do you know a place where we can eat lunch?" Han Li's unbelievably honest words stirred Qin Ping's heart, and he repeatedly agreed after arriving at Han Li's side. Then he made an extremely polite suggestion and immediately led the way to a small restaurant not too far away, praising the restaurant's exquisite signature dishes. Han Li found this humorous but still wore an "I'll let you decide" expression. Qin Ping then went in first, entering the two-story restaurant. The first floor only had commoners eating simple dishes. The second floor, however, was where those of status went to eat. Qin Ping naturally did not have Han Li eat on the first floor, although it seemed that his master had some intention to. There weren't many guests on the second floor, only 3 to 4 groups of people. At one of the tables, there were actually 5 truly notable figures, 3 men and 2 women. When Han Li walked onto this floor, he naturally looked at this group of people with surprise. This was because those 5 were actually qi condensation cultivators of the 10th layer or higher. The appearance of cultivators in a mortal establishment was quite unusual. Could they be from the 6 devil Dao sects? Han Li first thought. Han Li immediately restrained the spiritual qi in his body and used the drawing qi technique that he learned after achieving foundation establishment, withdrawing all of his spiritual qi into his body. As such, in the eyes of those with far lower cultivation, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Han Li and just another mortal. "Young master, please sit over here." Qin Ping dragged Han Li over to a table by the window with great difficulty as his feet ached. Then he used the sleeves to wipe down the wooden chair before inviting Han Li to sit down with a full smile. Han Li revealed embarrassment and promptly called Qin Ping to sit down as well. This time, Qin Ping wasn't too polite and after declining a few times, he sincerely sat down. His feet were truly in pain, but he was unable to break away from his status as a servant. Fortunately, this young Master Han who just entered the capital wasn't particularly attentive to formal etiquette. Having seen 2 people sit down, a waiter swiftly walked toward them and humbly asked, "What would these 2 guests like? This restaurant has many signature dishes that are quite renowned. I want a table of all your best dishes and bring your signature dishes as well. Also, use your very best ingredients. My young master is a young master of the Qin residence." Qin Ping knew that Han Li certainly didn't know how to order food and took the matter into his own hands, ordering on Han Li's behalf. After he mentioned the Qin residence, the servant's expression became far more lively. Sure enough, the reputation of the Qin residence was quite useful. After the waiter heard this, he immediately nodded his head, bowed, and even said a few words of flattery. He then rushed back after taking their orders. However, Han Li wasn't interested in flaunting his power to some servant. He was entirely focused on the cultivators sitting not that far from him. But what baffled him was that the 30-year-old blue-clothed man seemed familiar, as if he had seen him before. Han Li thought for a moment, but nothing came to mind. He absolutely wasn't someone he was very familiar with. The men, including the blue-clothed man whom Han Li found familiar, all drank a cup of alcohol with a face of worry. The 2 beautiful women were simply staring at their cups of alcohol, not even moving their chopsticks. It seemed they didn't have an appetite. From their appearances, they encountered no small amount of hardships. They truly didn't seem likely to be devil Dao cultivators infiltrating the state of Yue. The blue-clothed man seemed to be the youngest of the group, apart from a woman who appeared several years younger. "Young master, the food has arrived. Please eat first." At this moment, Han Li heard Qin Yan's respectful words from the side. The servant had already neatly and nimbly arranged the dishes onto the table. Let us eat together." Han Li smiled with slight embarrassment and opened his mouth, revealing his pure white teeth. At this moment, Han Li started to eat without restraint and looked to be completely focused on chewing. But in truth, he was stealthily releasing his spiritual sense, closely paying attention to the several cultivators nearby. When Qin Ping saw Han Li start to eat, he naturally moved his chopsticks about. At that moment, the eldest cultivator among them, an old man with a dark face, stopped drinking and suddenly released an invisible soundproof barrier around them. Then he said, "Everyone eat. Since our lives have fallen to the hands of others, we, companions from Mist Mountain, can only walk one step at a time." Regardless of how it is said, Not having our souls scattered is far better than what happened to other cultivators. Although the soundproof barrier was in effect and the dark-faced old man's voice wasn't loud, Han Li could clearly hear it. Soundproof magic techniques used by chi-refining cultivators were ineffective against Han Li's astonishing spiritual sense. However, the old man's words caused Han Li to know something was amiss. He could hear there was something being hidden from those words. Perhaps due to the dark-faced old man's words, the two women silently ate some food. However, they still seemed absent-minded. It was most likely they tasted nothing. Eldest brother, will we truly be manipulated by them from now on? This truly won't do. We can secretly tell the seven sects. Surely they will deal with them. After the blue-clothed man took 2 heavy drinks, he said this with a fierce complexion. The dark-faced old man sighed. Fourth brother, the matter isn't so simple. He lightly shook his head and revealed a sense of helplessness. Hearing the old man's words, the youngest white-clothed woman couldn't help but ask, Eldest brother, why can't we? Could it be those from the seven sects don't want to kill villains? In the state of UA, at least several hundred have died by their hands to preserve the Tao. When the white-clothed woman said this, her face displayed unwillingness. When the middle-aged man and woman saw the fierce reply, they silently looked at each other with a bitter smile. It seemed these two clearly understood what the dark-faced old man had misgivings about. When Han Li heard this, he was somewhat amazed. He felt that he had just faintly grasped onto something immensely huge. However, he maintained his cover by eating several more dishes, causing Qin Ping to praise Han Li's great appetite. Han Li smiled with a slight blush, as if he realized his actions were improper, and slowed down the speed at which he was eating. At this moment, the dark-faced old man sighed, and started to give the blue-clothed man and the white-clothed woman an explanation. In truth, calling the seven sects for help is simply useless. First of all, us rogue cultivators clearly understand the current circumstances of the seven sects. All of their manpower is focused on stopping the invasion of the Devil Tao, so how could they divert manpower to help us rogue cultivators? They even face against Foundation establishment cultivators. If the seven sects sent ordinary cultivators, they would fundamentally be unable to act. Otherwise, how else would the Devil Tao have captured us so easily? Secondly, even if the seven sects were truly worried about preserving the Tao, and they had actually sent forth men to eliminate our assailants, don't forget that they were wearing masks. We don't know anything about their appearance. Furthermore, they surprised us at an abandoned temple they happened to find, so any sort of help wouldn't have arrived on time. We simply have no means to act against them. Not to mention they put some sort of strange restriction on our bodies. If we don't follow their orders on time, it's likely we will be killed immediately. Also, is it certain that those from the seven sects will be able to remove our restrictions? Since they dared to let us leave so easily, they probably designed these restrictions themselves. They certainly aren't so easily destroyed. As the dark-faced old man said this, the more wrinkled his brow became. It seemed he spoke with despair. Then we can truly only side with the villains and help them trap other cultivators. The white-clothed woman's complexion greatly paled. She was clearly unwilling to do this. Fifth sister, it is as eldest brother has said. Right now, we can only walk one step at a time. Fortunately, we have some time before we'll be forced to act. During that time, hopefully us 5 friends from Mist Mountain will find a way to disobey them and escape. The tall and thin 40-year-old man spoke, consoling her. But these several people all knew that those words were flowery lies meant to deceive themselves. They hadn't been able to think of anything plausible these past few days. What likely was it that they'd find a way after a few months? With that said, these people became silent. Worry bubbled forth in their hearts. Chapter 285, Disregard and Rumors. After Han Li heard all of this, he understood nearly everything. What these people unexpectedly said had to do with the disappearance of cultivators in the state of UA during the past recent years. These several people had probably been captured by the masterminds behind the plot and then let go after being threatened. But from hearing their tone of voice, they were already being controlled and forced to harm others. All sorts of thoughts quickly churned through Han Li's mind, but after a short moment, he decided that this matter was better left untouched. After all, these people were the reason behind the disappearance of many cultivators. Even so, they had been freely acting to this day but still remained unexposed. This by itself explained how exceptionally cunning they were, and how truly out of the ordinary these people must be. Furthermore, since they could control Foundation establishment cultivators, they might have core formation cultivators behind them. He himself was but a mere lone foundation establishment cultivator. During such troubled times, it would be better to not invite disaster upon himself. With this decision in mind, Han Li immediately withdrew his spiritual sense and no longer paid attention to this group of cultivators. Although this group of people was unfortunate and pitiful, he was not one to show kindness for no reason. He also didn't want to brave this huge danger that had nothing to do with him. He could only hope they would find better fortune. Furthermore, the current 7 sects were as the dark-faced man had deduced. The entirety of their power was focused on repelling the devil Dao. They basically had no men to spare. Even if Han Li helped inform them of this matter, they most likely wouldn't care for something unrelated to themselves. Han Li could only think this with disregard. Since he didn't need to split his attention to hear the whispered conversation, Han Li became focused on eating. From time to time, he would pretend to be curious, pointing to a few novel things out the window and asking Qin Ping about them. Naturally, Qin Ping continued to give Han Li full and detailed explanations. While he did so, most of the table's food entered Han Li's stomach, causing Qin Ping to click his tongue. He inwardly thought that this young master not only had vigorous energy but also a voracious appetite. At this moment, the cultivators sitting on the table climbed down to the lower floor. Han Li clearly saw them leave with dejected spirits. It seemed that they hadn't thought of a good solution within this short span of time. Seeing this, Han Li had Qin Ping settle the bill after eating several more mouthfuls of food. However, Qin Ping happily smiled. He took out a small Qin residence medallion and arrogantly walked to the first floor. Not long after, he went back up and made a report to Han Li. "Young master, I showed them the pocket medallion. I told the shopkeeper to go to our residence at the end of the month to settle the bill. As such, we don't have to bring silver with us to pay our bill. Every month, the young masters of the Qin residence are given several hundred taels of silver as spending money. I have already logged the meal bill under the young master's name." When Han Li heard this, he was slightly surprised. Once again, he felt the luxury of the Qin residence. However, a blank expression appeared on his face as he carelessly nodded his head several times. Then he brought Qin Ping to the lower floor. In the afternoon, Han Li didn't think to continue on foot. Having learned from previous pain, Qin Ping suggested calling for a carriage. They then made a trip to several significant locations in Yuejing. Although they couldn't visit many of the sites, Han Li finally felt that he had a general idea on the topography and street layout. It was unlikely that the Qin residents would have met their doom, as Han Li was having a look in the capital city. Night came. Han Li returned to the Qin residence fully satisfied. At this moment, the gatekeeper Qin Gui hastily rushed out of the gatehouse to greatly ingratiate himself to Han Li without even waiting for him to step off the carriage. He was afraid that this newly appeared young Master Han would bear a grudge about yesterday's matter for having not respected him. He needed to have Han Li's impression of him improve. But how could Han Li be bothered to remember such a thing from yesterday when he had other things to worry about? He had long forgotten about the matter. At this moment, his mind was filled with thoughts of how he could protect the Qin residents. It was truly no good. He had to protect Qin Yan's life at the very least, else he would have to explain himself to Li Hueyuan. With this thought, Han Li came to a decision and entered the Qin residence with ease. At night, Han Li directly went to find his uncle Qin while avoiding all others. After a moment of detailed discussion within the secret room, Han Li returned in high spirits. On the next day, those related to Qin Yan had suddenly discovered that an unfamiliar youth had appeared at his side. Furthermore, he seemed completely unsophisticated, unlike anyone native to Yuejing. With great enthusiasm, Qin Yan introduced this youth to all familiar with him as a descendant of a senior from his own clan. His close friends then said they would properly support Han Li in the future and other such things. Qin Yan's friends weren't officials or nobles, but rather hugely wealthy and influential merchants. Although they found it quite baffling that a youth was following Qin Yan so closely, after they made a few inquiries about Han Li, those wily old foxes naturally looked upon Han Li as kind and friendly seniors. Han Li also made contact with the upper echelon of Yuejing eventually. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed by. Han Li appeared to have truly become a young master of the Qin residence. Not only was his treatment the same as Qin Yan's own descendants, but up until this day, regardless if it was business, social niceties, or visiting a guest in his residence, Clan Lord Qin always brought Han Li along at his side without exception. It appeared as if he wanted to cultivate Han Li with great effort. As such, the rumors that Han Li was Clan Lord Qin's illegitimate child quickly spread outside of the Qin residence. Even aristocratic families acquainted with the Qin residence had long heard of these rumors. However, Qin Yan completely ignored these rumors and left them to the imagination, causing everyone to tacitly agree and further solidifying the rumor as truth. As a result, the younger generation of the Qin clan became impatient. It was unknown whether it was incited by the senior generation, but with clever pettiness and overconfidence, they unexpectedly started to make indirect inquiries on the validity of these rumors. However, Han Li continued to play the unwitting fool, so naturally those people left without any results. As time passed, the people of the Qin residence tacitly understood that Han Li was a young master of the Qin residence and believed Han Li to be greatly loved by Qin Yan. However, they thought it was a result making up for guilt towards Han Li. Although several of the young masters and madams of the Qin clan that had originally been doted on by Qin Yan felt greatly unsatisfied from this, under the great pressure of their lord grandfather, they didn't dare to make any obvious action against Han Li. They could only pinch their nose and resist for the time being. However, they cursed Han Li behind his back on more than one occasion, calling him a country bumpkin and the like. However, these people did not know that at night, when Han Li was refining qi and cultivating in his room, he would periodically envelope the entire Qin residence with his spiritual sense. Although he wasn't able to sustain it for very long, it was more than enough to discover quite a few secrets. Han Li clearly heard these people's indignant words. Although Han Li wouldn't teach these inexperienced and naive children a lesson, their seniors, who were secretly polishing plans to disgrace him, left Han Li somewhat speechless. He wouldn't bother with these mortals, but if the devil Dao were to suddenly strike, these people would naturally be the last to be protected. That would be Han Li's minor retaliation. One day, Qin Yan was unexpectedly invited to a banquet by an extraordinarily important person, a prince. It was said that this prince's favored concubine had recovered from great illness, so he was arranging a great banquet in celebration. Although the Qin clan weren't the richest merchants in Yuejing, their power and influence absolutely were in the top 3, so they would naturally be given an invitation card. Furthermore, it wasn't just Qin Yan who was invited. The invitation mentioned that the prince wished to make friends with the young masters and talented women of the Qin clan. It is said that the young prince had particularly wanted them to go. With no better choice, Qin Yan could only go together with his juniors. The juniors who learned of this news immediately rejoiced with happiness on the spot. However, ever since Qin Yan heard that the Qin clan was in the middle of a crisis, he naturally couldn't allow his juniors to fool around outside during this time. If the devil Dao were actually carefully watching them, as Han Li said, then they would be facing certain calamity. Thus, within these last 2 months, Lord Qin had been using a variety of excuses to forbid his juniors from leaving the premises. How could this not cause the lazy and spoiled Qin clan young masters and madams from complaining endlessly? What angered them even more was that Han Li wasn't much different from them in age, yet he had permission to leave early and return late, to indulge in pleasure and forget about duty. This caused these people to loudly cry out with injustice. Now that there was such an opportunity, these Qin clan juniors were naturally in high spirits since they would all go together. Prince Xin, the prince who invited them, was one of the younger brothers of the king of the state of Yue. From what Qin Yan said, although he was a member of the royal family, he was very forthright and made many friends. Not only did high-ranking officials, nobles, and greatly wealthy merchants all wish to meet him, even common butchers and strange Jiang who, eccentrics, were rather familiar with him. Of course, in order to prevent arousing ill intentions, he didn't dare to closely associate with high-ranking and greatly influential military officials and bureaucrats. As such, the prince had a great reputation among the commoners of Yuejing. Furthermore, he had garnered quite a bit of praise. When Han Li heard this, he had a general impression of this prince. As for the specifics, he would naturally need to lay his eyes on him first. After all, although his surface reputation was quite good, such great characters were more often shady characters underneath. Chapter 286, Prince's Residence. Chapter 286, Prince's Residence. Prince Xin's residence actually wasn't in the imperial city. Instead, it was constructed in the South District. After Han Li and company sat in a carriage for 2 hours, they eventually arrived at a certain street. The architectural styles of the South region and the Qin residence were clearly different. Most of the buildings here were constructed to standard and template. How great an official's position was, meaning how high they were in that position, could be clearly told by the size and style of their residence. All of the officials' residences were located at this district. The strict following of feudal rank and elevation strictly divided the officials. Nobody here dared to alter these buildings as they wished, else they would break a law and invite punishment. As a relative of the king, Prince Xin possessed royal status, so naturally his residence was one of the best in the South District. The mansion residences area was larger than the Qin residence by about a half. However, this was balanced by huge residential rooms. When the carriage to Prince Xin's residence stopped, Han Li took a look at the mansion residence and immediately felt that the mortal world was thriving in wealth. The residence's gate was over 15 meters tall and over 10 meters wide. Thickly wrapped with yellow copper, it was embedded with several tens of huge nails, appearing quite luxurious and imposing. In addition, there were two 10-meter stone platforms to the sides of the gate, each with a fierce azure lion statue. They were each sparklingly polished through its entire body, so bright they were hard to look at. But what awed people the most from Prince Xin's residence were the 16 neatly armored palace guards standing on the steps outside the gate. Prince Xin had borrowed these guards from the imperial city barracks to prevent any mishap from happening. The steward of Prince Xin's estate was a small old man. In the place of the host, Prince Xin, he was on the steps greeting every new guest with a smile across his face. He didn't dare to neglect even a single guest. At this moment, several tens of carriages of various sizes had stopped in front of the residence's gate, occupying nearly all of the empty space in front of the mansion. In front of the huge azure stone platforms, 5 or 6 guests who had yet to enter the residence were exchanging greetings. Their clothes were magnificent, their movements elegant. It seemed their status was not low. Seeing this, Qin Yan straightened his clothes and overcautiously stepped off the carriage. After a diligent glance in every direction to ensure there were no cultivators nearby, Han Li left the carriage at ease. As for the young masters and madams of the Qin clan, they left the carriages as soon as they arrived. They stood in front of the mansion, talking cheerfully. Han Li looked at the guests who were still in front of the steps and discovered that apart from the juniors of the Qin clan, almost all the other guests had also brought along their children and other such youths. Could it be that the so-called Prince Xin deliberately sent all of these invitations to the prince's residence as a pretense to deliberately gather youths to this place? With this thought, Han Li felt there wasn't any substantial evidence and took a glance at Qin Yan. From his wrinkled brow, it seemed Qin Yan was also slightly surprised. "Grandfather, we're going in first. The young prince is waiting on us." A 16 to 17-year-old Qin clan young master saw that his lord grandfather still hadn't moved far from his carriage and couldn't help but gather the courage to say these words under the encouragement of his siblings. He seemed afraid that Qin Yan would criticize him. "All right, I got it. Everyone can go in." Greatly going against these youngsters' expectations, Qin Yan nodded and happily agreed. This caused these youths to feel slightly overwhelmed by favor. They couldn't help but happily walk among their peers. However, without waiting for Qin Yan to bring these people forward, the steward of the prince's residence immediately spotted this group after dealing with another guest. He immediately took the initiative to welcome them with a large smile. Walking over to them, he said very cordially, "Sir Qin, you've arrived at last. My lord prince talked for several days about how you haven't come to visit for so long. Please enter as soon as possible. I'm sure the prince will be very happy to see you, Sir Qin." Recently I haven't." This steward of the prince's residence wasn't ordinary. With just a few eloquent words, he was able to get everyone who heard him to smile and feel warm inside. Qin Yan couldn't help but smile as he chatted with this steward with ease. However, because there were still guests arriving at the prince's residence, the steward couldn't speak much longer with Qin Yan and brought them inside the residence. Then, after a few modest words, he quickly went back to the residence's gate. Although Han Li remained at Qin Yan's side, he remained silent. However, the moment when Han Li looked at the back of the steward, suspicion flashed through his eyes. He didn't know why, but although Han Li definitely didn't feel any spiritual power fluctuating from the steward's body, Han Li suddenly felt his blood run cold when this man drew near, as if a fearsome demonic beast were approaching him. This caused Han Li to feel greatly uneasy. Although Han Li did not know why he felt this, he had always fully trusted his senses. He immediately added this steward to the list of names he should be wary of. "Honorable nephew Han, let's go. I'll give you an introduction to a few old friends of mine." When Qin Yan saw the steward depart, he said this toward Han Li with a smile. This caused the several Qin clan members standing next to Qin Yan to immediately grow sour. They all felt that this clan lord of theirs was far too biased. However, Han Li only smiled to himself. He knew this was truly just an excuse Qin Yan came up with so that Han Li could stay by his side at all times. They were then led to a large guest hall of Prince Zin's residence by Qin Yan. There seemed to be over 100 people in the hall, but although there seemed to be many guests, since people arrived in groups of 2 and 3, the Qin residence's party of 8 was the same size as parties from 3 sects. At this moment, Prince Zin had yet to appear in the hall. It seemed he wouldn't appear until all his guests were present. Just as Qin Yan arrived at the entrance of the large hall, he was immediately cordially called out by a few familiar long-time friends. Qin Yan naturally saluted and replied to them all. But when he swept his eyes across the room, he said a few words of apology and walked over to a sickly old man accompanied by a young man and a young woman. The man had an earnest face with thick eyebrows and large eyes. Although the woman's appearance wasn't outstanding, her large eyes were provocative, and she looked through the juniors at Qin Yan's side with no trace of politeness. Han Li was naturally among those she had swept her eyes over. "Senior brother Hua, I didn't think such a great medicine god as yourself would show up here. I would have thought that with your disposition, you would decline an invitation to such an occasion." Qin Yan walked in front of the old man and sat down next to him with no trace of politeness, teasing him with a soft voice. I originally thought not to come, but the strange illness afflicting the prince's concubine had been cured. This greatly piqued my curiosity, and I thought to see what expert doctor was able to perform such a miraculous feat." The old man that Qin Yan familiarly addressed as Senior Brother Hua softly replied with a faint smile. "Oh, so it's like that. So the rumor that Prince Zin had invited Senior Brother to treat his favorite concubine's illness wasn't just a rumor. Could it be that Senior Brother Hua's healing arts weren't enough to treat this illness?" When Han Li saw Qin Yan's great astonishment, he reasoned that the medicinal expertise of this old man should be very well known within Yuejing. There are countless odd and fantastic illnesses in this world. I only gain my current reputation through pure luck. There are a few strange, untreatable illnesses that are quite strange and difficult even with my medical expertise." The old man smiled without seeming to mind. His view of the world seemed quite wide. "But I still can't believe it. There is actually another great doctor within Yuejing who has superior medicinal expertise." Qin Yan shook his head. He seemed to hold much confidence in this old man's healing arts. But when old man Hua heard this, he faintly smiled and didn't speak any further. Then he pointed to the young man and woman at his side and said, "These two are Hua Nan and Hua Fang. You've seen them before. Come over and greet your grandpa Qin." Old man Hua was clearly viewed with much respect in these two's eyes. This pair agreed without the slightest hesitation and rushed over to salute and greet Qin Yan. I didn't think that your grandson and granddaughter would suddenly grow so big since the moment I took my eyes off them so many years ago. I don't have anything good to give on hand. How about I give them these jade-embedded pendants as a welcoming gift?" As Qin Yan amiably said this, he felt around his body and took out a pair of flawless dark green jade pendants. From a single look, one could tell these items were exceptionally valuable. Although a strange expression of satisfaction flashed through the man's eyes, it quickly disappeared. The woman's face, however, was filled with joy, and she looked at the jade pendant with her fiery gaze. "Don't hesitate. If you want them, then take them. Old brother Qin is no stranger to our household." When old man Hua saw this, he couldn't help but yell this with a smile. When they heard this, the man and woman then dared to take the jade pendants that Qin Yan offered them. Their expressions were quite happy. "Apart from this one, I've already seen the other juniors several times already. Could it be the dear nephew who recently arrived at Yuejing?" The old man's gaze then arrived at Han Li, sizing him up with great curiosity. "That's right, this is Han Li. He's a descendant of my senior. Honorable nephew Han, this is your senior uncle Hua, one of the 2 great medicine gods of Yuejing." At this moment, Qin Yan then thought to introduce Han Li to this senior brother of his. "Greetings to senior uncle Hua," Han Li sincerely shouted to him. And not bad, not bad. Old man Hua truly did not see anything that was outstanding about Han Li, but he still spoke those words of praise. But after a moment of thought, he remembered the rumors that were being spread about the youth. He hesitated for a moment before taking out a small white bottle with his wrinkled, shriveled hands and offered it to Han Li. This is a heart-protecting pill that I meticulously refined. Although I don't dare to say it will cure anything, common small illnesses and injuries will not be a problem. I will give this to honorable nephew Han to protect himself. When the words left the old man's mouth, Han Li immediately felt the envy and jealousy of the Qin clan members behind him. Hua Nan and Hua Fang also revealed an expression of shock. The fame of this heart-protecting pill was obviously greatly renowned. Chapter 287, Immortal Master. Chapter 287, Immortal Master. Han Li, as a Foundation establishment cultivator, naturally wouldn't pay any attention to the medicinal pills of mortals. However, at this moment he definitely could not refuse the other person's goodwill. Thus, he hesitated slightly and then received it with a bashful expression. Haha, honorable nephew Han. This heart-protecting pill was refined from Brother Hua's secret recipe. It isn't easily given to other people. Bringing it out today as a welcoming gift is being quite generous. Qin Yan knew that Han Li wouldn't place much value on this item, but he still tried to say a few pleasant-sounding sentences for his good friend, hoping that the elder surnamed Hua would leave a good impression on Han Li. The elder glanced at Qin Yan strangely a few times, not knowing what he and Han Li meant by saying these things in front of him. He had only given such a precious medicinal pill to this youth in order to give Qin Yan some face. How could this extremely expensive pill otherwise be given to a stranger he had just met? Just as the elder was hesitating about whether or not to ask, a sharp sound entered the room. Prince Xin has arrived. The servant's transmission immediately caused all of the clamor in the room to immediately subside. All of the people glanced respectfully towards one of the side doors in the room. 4 maidservants first walked out of that door, standing on both sides of the head seat. Then, a man and a woman leisurely walked out. The man was a 40-year-old middle-aged man with a beard a few inches long. His square face and tiger-like eyes exuded a natural dignity and power. The other was a 23-year-old beautiful woman dressed in palace attire, her long dress trailing on the ground. Seeing them walk in, all of the people sitting stood up and paid their respects to the male and female. Prince, Madam, greetings. Because this young woman was not Prince Zin's original wife, she was only the concubine he most recently favored. These people could only call her Madam. Everyone is a good friend of this prince. There's no need to be so courteous. Come, everybody sit down. The way that Prince Xin spoke was very different from the impression that his face gave. It was very mild and straightforward, causing people's favorable impression of him to rise. The beautiful concubine next to him naturally did not say anything. She simply stood there with a charming smile. When the others heard these words, they all glanced at each other and smiled before sitting down. This prince has a straightforward personality. If I have something to say, I will just say it to everyone. Prince Xin spoke with a smile a moment after he sat down. This sentence caused all the people facing him to begin to speak animatedly. Prince, if you have anything to say, please say it. Yes, we have known Prince for many years now. Everyone knows the kind of attitude that the prince has. It was obvious that, while there were some who spoke genuinely, there are also others who spoke simply to flatter Prince Xin. The reason why I've invited everyone here today is because my beloved Kinger's sickness has been completely healed. This prince's joy dictates that I have some excitement and celebrate without restraint. In addition, this prince has an enormous piece of good fortune that I want to give everyone. As for whether one has enough karma to obtain it, that will depend on individual luck. Prince Xin's words greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. They couldn't help but glance at each other. Had the prince gathered these people together solely to give them a piece of good fortune, this was too inconceivable. Kinger, look. Isn't everyone somewhat surprised just like this prince had expected? Not only was he not angry, Prince Xin actually gave a light laugh as he addressed the beautiful concubine by his side. Hearing this, the beautiful woman called Kinger chuckled gently and then responded with a lovely voice. Prince, perhaps anyone who heard these words would feel somewhat surprised. Everyone's response is only natural. Prince Xin laughed and stroked the short beard on his chin after hearing this woman's words. Then, he turned around and explained to the shocked gathering. There's no need for everyone to be puzzled. It's like this. Kinger's strange illness was actually cured by a newly arrived expert. This expert can call the wind, summon the rain, breathe in fire, and spit out ice, a true and genuine immortal. In addition, after curing Kinger's illness, This living immortal was actually able to immediately recognize that this prince, young son, has spiritual roots and can comprehend immortal techniques. He thus accepted this prince, inferior son, as one of his disciples. Not long from now, my son will embark on the path of cultivation. Having spoken up to this point, Prince Xin couldn't help but reveal a delighted expression on his face. A pot-bellied person in the crowd immediately called out, "Immortal cultivator, could this person be an immortal cultivator from lore?" This sentence instantly sparked a commotion amongst everyone in the large room. Although cultivators were regarded as extremely mysterious by mortals in the secular world, all of the people sitting here were not ordinary individuals. Naturally, they had all more or less heard of something along those lines. Some of their ancestors had even made deals with a few cultivators. Even nowadays, there were always rumors circulating in the outside world that there were cultivators standing guard inside the imperial palace. This caused all the people to revere cultivators even more. Now that the visitors in the room had actually heard that a living immortal had come to Prince Zin's mansion, most of the people in the room instantly revealed extremely excited expressions. Hearing this, Qin Yan was initially shocked in his heart, and he couldn't help turning his head to glance at Han Li. However, the Han Li in his sight expressed nothing, and his face appeared to be normal. Seeing this, Qin Yan did not dare to ask more questions. He could only turn his head back and listen to Prince Zin's next words. At this time, seeing that everyone had been stunned by his words, Prince Zin laughed and continued to speak. Naturally, this prince has also asked this expert, and he confirmed that he is an immortal cultivator. In addition, under this prince's earnest urging, he is willing to stay a few more months here and teach this prince ways to maintain good health. This prince also discovered that this immortal came specifically to accept some disciples with the karma to be an immortal. Upon knowing this prince immediately thought of all of you. Not only this, but I even asked all of you to summon all of your younger relatives because this immortal master is willing to accept both female and male disciples. In a moment, I will invite this immortal Master Wu to step out and introduce him to everyone. As for whether or not they have this good fortune, it will depend on their karma. If the words he had spoken before were only meant to arouse the envy of everyone present, the Prince Zin's following words were naturally like a huge meat bun that had just landed on everyone's heads, surprising them all. Instantly, the sound of people expressing their deep gratitude began to sound out. An immortal cultivator. This was a real immortal walking on the earth. As long as one succeeded in cultivating, he or she could live a few hundred years and would even know how to use immortal magic and techniques. If these important figures' own offsprings were lucky enough to become a disciple, how great a backing would that be? When Han Li heard this, a strange feeling rose in his heart even though his expression appeared to be wooden. He initially thought he had found the trail of the devil Dao, once Prince Xin spoke of the living immortal. But upon hearing that the immortal wanted to wantonly accept disciples, something didn't seem right. How could cultivators who infiltrated other countries to cause trouble draw attention to themselves in such a way? Wasn't that setting themselves up as a target? Unless this cultivator was. Just as Han Li was thinking about this, in the midst of all the excitement, the living immortal finally appeared in the room with an arrogant expression. He wore a gray Taoist robe, and his hair and beard were completely white. His face was ruddy like an infant's, appearing completely like a legendary expert. This kind of image caused the majority of the people present to instantly believe his identity despite him having yet to use any sort of magic. However, when Han Li saw this immortal master, who looked like he came straight out of a painting, he was speechless for quite some time. This was but a mere 5th or 6th layer qi condensation cultivator. If Han Li were to stretch out a finger, perhaps he could easily pinch him to death. But this kind of expert was enough to cause high-ranking mortals to crowd around him, incessantly flattering and fawning over him. They hoped that this old immortal would grant them a favor and accept one of their sons or daughters as a disciple. When Qin Yan saw this, couldn't help but feel somewhat restless. The elder behind him displayed an even more anxious gaze. They were both worried that if they were to act too late, all of the karma would be completely taken away by the other people. Just as Qin Yan was hesitating, Han Li's voice suddenly came from beside him. Relax, this person is not of the devil Dao. As for whether or not you want your descendants to take him as their master, that's entirely up to you. I am only here to ensure the safety of your Qin clan. However, the cultivation of this immortal master is. Ha ha. While laughing coldly, Han Li's voice suddenly disappeared. Qin Yan was shocked. He hurriedly glanced at his surroundings only to discover that apart from himself, no one seemed to have heard what was spoken to him. That old brother Hua was still asking him incredulously why he didn't also head towards the immortal master to allow his descendants to try out their karma. At the same time, Elder Hua realized that this was why the strange illness that he had no way of curing was instantly cured by that person. It was because he was a cultivator. Having said this, the elder couldn't be bothered to convince Qin Yan anymore. Similarly, he also drew near to the white-haired elder. His grandson and granddaughter naturally followed closely behind him. Chapter 288, Enchanting Confrontation. Chapter 288, Enchanting Confrontation. Seeing that even the normally extremely steady Elder Hua behaved in such a hurried manner, Qin Yan finally made his decision. Although he could tell Han Li's disdain for this immortal master from his tone, the other person was still a cultivator who was willing to accept disciples. As for whether this immortal master's cultivation layer was high or low, he did not have the time to worry about that too much. Originally, he had given thought to have his own juniors apprentice themselves to Han Li. However, in the time he spent in contact with Han Li, he realized that Han Li hadn't the slightest interest in accepting disciples and was unable to pursue this matter. His father had told him that when the first generation of the Qin clan had grown wealthy, immortal master Li Huayuan made a trip to the Qin clan to see if any of the children had immortal karma. Unfortunately, not a single person had such luck, and Li Huayuan could only return with disappointment. During immortal master Li's next visit to the Qin clan, the matter of accepting disciples wasn't raised. According to the words of immortal master Li Huayuan, the Qin clan's immortal karma had only appeared for a single generation, and that the Qin clan descendants wouldn't have any destiny of becoming his disciples. But now an opportunity for cultivation had appeared before his eyes. Qin Yan naturally had to give it a try. With this thought, Qin Yan made his decision and called out for his several juniors to go over. Han Li looked at the scene with a cool eye and didn't say anything. Since he already gave Qin Yan a brief explanation, he naturally wouldn't further meddle with their business. With that said, Han Li hadn't paid attention to whether the young masters and young madams of the Qin clan had any spiritual roots. Among the mortals of the secular world, perhaps only 1 in 10,000 had spiritual roots. It was truly a pitifully small few. Just as Han Li thought this, he suddenly saw that of the crowd of Qin clan juniors who went over to immortal Master Wu. 2 of them unexpectedly turned their head towards him and sneered at him. They appeared proud and satisfied, as if they were mocking him. After Han Li saw this, he blankly stared for an instant before immediately breaking out in silent, involuntary laughter. Obviously, when these few people saw that Qin Yan didn't call for Han Li to see if he had immortal karma, they believed that their lord grandfather Qin actually truly loved and favored them the most. Thus they appeared extremely content. After Han Li inwardly shook his head, he felt disinclined to pay more attention to them and instead looked around the hall. At this moment, those who remained seated without moving were an extreme few, only 6 or 7. The majority of those who had previously chosen to cut themselves off were displaying complete regret at this moment. The only thing that aroused Han Li's attention was a senior and a youth sitting at the corner of the hall. The elderly person was an azure-robed old man over 60 years old with a head of gray hair. He appeared to be calmly tasting green tea, as if he wasn't paying mind to the matter of immortal karma before him. The youth was smooth-skinned with delicate features. He occasionally looked in immortal Master Wu's direction with disdain. Although these two appeared to be sitting quite leisurely, when Han Li saw the two, he couldn't help but reveal a slight smile. This old-young duo were unexpectedly both cultivators. Furthermore, their cultivation wasn't bad. The azure-robed old man appeared to have a cultivation base of the 9th layer, while the youth cultivated to the 6th layer, not lower than that of immortal Master Wu. But what slightly shocked Han Li was that he didn't know what technique they used. They were able to almost completely restrain their own spiritual qi. Were it not for Han Li's greatly superior cultivation base, he truly wouldn't have easily been able to make out that they were cultivators. As for that immortal Master Wu, he naturally didn't have the ability to make out anything strange from the two. This technique, capable of concealing one's spiritual qi from similarly ranked cultivators, immediately caught Han Li's interest. If he could learn this method, then wouldn't it give him decisive opportunities during battles with similarly ranked cultivators? With this thought, Han Li took a careful look at the two. As a result, Han Li discovered something strange. The pretty youth was actually a disguised woman, with delicate white ears and thin holes on her earlobes. Han Li was slightly stunned. That youth accidentally saw Han Li blankly staring at her and couldn't help but blush, returning a fierce glare back. The movements of the young woman wearing men's clothes aroused the attention of the old man by her side. He wrinkled his brow and turned his head, taking an expressionless glance toward Han Li. When Han Li saw this, he smiled toward the old man. The azure-robed old man felt greatly surprised. He originally believed that it was some clan's frivolous young master that had seen through his granddaughter's disguise and was looking at her with an obscene gaze. But he didn't expect that it was a completely unremarkable youth who was actually looking at her with a completely reckless and fearless manner. The azure-robed old man grew a bit angry in his heart, and after muttering to himself for a moment, he softly closed his eyes. This movement surprised Han Li for a moment, and he couldn't help but immediately guess. He closed his eyes. Could it be he wants to? Having yet to complete his thoughts, the old man's following actions completely confirmed Han Li's guess. He saw the old man open his eyes and look at Han Li with a gaze filled with purple brilliance. He actually used a bewitchment-type technique on Han Li. It seemed he wanted Han Li to make a fool of himself on the spot in order to teach him a small lesson. When Han Li saw this, he found it a bit humorous. An old man at the 9th layer of qi condensation actually wanted to use a bewitchment technique on a mid-foundation establishment cultivator such as himself. Was he courting death? By only striking back with a bit of magic power, he would certainly reverse the magic technique onto his opponent. However, since Han Li was interested in obtaining the other party's qi restraining technique, he naturally didn't want them to feel great animosity towards him. Thus, he could only wear a slight smile on his face and look at the old man without the slightest appearance of anything strange. This caused the azure-robed old man's cold smile to slowly become an expression of shock, immediately exposing an appearance of amazement. The old man inwardly yelled, "Not good," but when he thought to move his eyes away, it was already too late. The moment Han Li met the old man's gaze, a faint yellow radiance flashed in his eyes. His gaze drew the old man like a magnet, causing the old man to be incapable of moving his eyes away. The azure-robed old man became scared and shocked, while simultaneously feeling great regret. He hadn't thought at all that this youth, who didn't appear to have the slightest bit of magic power, was actually a cultivator. Furthermore, his cultivation was vastly greater than his own. Had he known sooner, he wouldn't have used the nightmare technique and allowed his consciousness to fall under the other party's complete control, incapable of breaking free of his grasp. The old man became increasingly fearful, and in an instant his forehead was covered with beads of sweat the size of soybeans, his face ashen. However, his eyes were still rigidly staring at Han Li. The young woman wearing male clothing at his side eventually saw that her senior wasn't moving. She anxiously pulled on the old man's sleeve with haste. Surprisingly, this tore away at the azure-robed old man's confinement, allowing the old man to easily break away from Han Li's gaze and freeing him from the backlash of the nightmare technique. Right now, the azure-robed old man felt that he had barely escaped from entering the cycle of reincarnation. During this time, his mind had lagged behind, and he couldn't help but blankly stare for a moment. After a moment, he seemed to have woken up, and his consciousness returned to his body. However, the back of his clothes had been thoroughly soaked with cold sweat. At this moment, he hastily said a few words with a soft voice and a terrified expression to the young woman. Afterwards, he didn't dare to look in Han Li's direction again. The azure-robed old man clearly understood that the young woman couldn't have possibly broken his daze so easily, which meant that he must have been treated leniently by the other party. Although he didn't know why the other party had done so, it would be better for this grandparent-grandchild pair to go far, far away from here. The cultivation base of the youth with a common appearance was truly fearsome. Furthermore, what puzzled him was that, although he had used the Heaven's Eye technique to examine him, he couldn't see the slightest fluctuation of magic power on his body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have rashly used the nightmare technique. Could it be this person's cultivation has reached? Once the azure-robed old man made his guess, his face grew green. If it were as he guessed, then hadn't he provoked a major power that should never be provoked? With this thought, the sliver of consciousness that the old man had just recovered became turbulent. Startled, the young woman in male clothing looked at the old man's face as it changed between green and red. She felt great astonishment seeing this. In her mind, her grandfather, who was always calm and collected with an expression as steady as Mt. Tai, was actually dumbfounded. Could it be that the seemingly ordinary youth was truly so fearsome? With this thought, she couldn't help but have the urge turn her head and study Han Li. However, without waiting for her to move her head, the old man seemed to have seen through the young woman's intent and suddenly whispered to her gravely, "Don't provoke that youngster. If my guess isn't wrong, then he's likely to be a foundation establishment cultivator. You mustn't provoke him no matter what." "What? A foundation establishment cultivator? Impossible, he's only a youth." The young woman covered her gasp of shock with her jade hands. She turned pale and didn't dare to be too loud. Chapter 289, Immortals Technique. Although the young lady's charming face revealed doubt, she knew her grandfather wasn't one to babble nonsense and became extremely shocked. She could only resist further looking in Han Li's direction with some difficulty. Seeing that he taught the other party a small lesson without truly harming him, Han Li was fully satisfied. At this moment, his lips slightly moved and transmitted his voice over. Then the azure-robed old man immediately heard Han Li's voice. "After you leave the Prince Zin's mansion, don't hurry to depart. Wait for me at the mansion's back gate. I have a few matters to ask you." Han Li's voice was filled with the unquestionable tone of a command, stunning the old man and causing him to inwardly curse in his heart without end. Could it be this expert doesn't want to let this grandparent-grandchild pair go? What plan does he have for these two in mind? Regardless, it's fortunate for me that the other party doesn't seem to be the merciless type. There shouldn't be any danger. Furthermore, being able to form a relationship with a foundation establishment cultivator is an invigorating opportunity that's hard to come by for a clan. The azure-robed old man could only think these comforting thoughts. However, his heart was a mess, and he was suffering internally without end. When Han Li saw this, he faintly smiled and returned his attention to the old white-haired Taoist. At this moment, Immortal Master Wu had already finished inspecting the majority of the crowd, and still hadn't found someone with immortal karma. The youngster who were declared to lack immortal karma could only dejectedly return to their seats. Their seniors naturally didn't have any pleased expressions. What's immortal karma? He's clearly looking for people with spiritual roots. However, this old Taoist isn't a completely ignorant and appears to truly be looking to accept disciples. Otherwise, he could just casually point to a few random people. Han Li thought indifferently as he saw the old Taoist examining each of the youths for spiritual roots with extreme care. However, Han Li felt that looking for disciples here was truly futile. Among these 50 to 60 people, the chances of finding someone with spiritual roots were truly too low. Just as Han Li thought this, the old white-haired Taoist loudly shouted, "This child has immortal karma. I can accept him as my disciple." When Han Li heard this, he blankly stared. He couldn't help but look at this person with immortal karma. He only saw a simple and fat youth standing in front of Immortal Master Wu with a vacant expression, not knowing what to do. A large, pot-bellied middle-aged man wearing purple silk robes stood next to the boy. He closely asked with an incredulous expression, "Immortal Master, my clan's child Jing truly has immortal karma. Are you mistaken?" This man felt that a huge meat pie had truly fallen on his head and didn't dare to believe it. For so many years, this son of his had never shown the slightest of talent or accomplished anything. But now, the youth who only ate and didn't give back to society had unexpectedly caught the eye of this immortal master. The youth's father truly didn't know if he was dreaming. "He, benefactor, be at ease. This humble Taoist has already examined this boy many times. Your son truly has immortal roots and can study immortal techniques together with the prince's son." When Immortal Master Wu saw this, he twirled his white beard around his finger and smiled. "Many thanks, Immortal Master, many thanks. Although this one isn't a wealthy and great noble, we still have a bit of meager land. Tomorrow I will certainly prepare a great offering for accepting my son as your apprentice. Son, quickie kowtow to the Immortal Master." After the middle-aged man verified this matter with certainty, he danced with joy and began speaking incoherently. When the youngsters who hadn't been chosen saw this, they were dumbfounded. The person who entered Immortal Wu's eyes was Fatty Tong, whom they had always regarded as useless. This kind of useless person actually had immortal roots. This was far too hard to believe. Not only did the youngsters think this, but their seniors also couldn't help but look at each other in dismay and feel that this was quite incredulous. After all, this useless youth Tong Jing had been chosen instead of their own sons. Han Li's expression, on the other hand, wasn't the slightest bit strange. People who possess spiritual roots weren't always handsome and confident or ravishingly beautiful. Furthermore, there wasn't the slightest relationship with their capacity for knowledge either. There was absolutely no pattern that could determine whether someone possessed spiritual roots. Otherwise, cultivator clans wouldn't have appeared, and cultivator sects wouldn't have to go out and seek brilliant students either. However, to actually find someone with spiritual roots in a small group was a bit surprising to Han Li. It seemed that the luck of this Taoist priest wasn't bad. Naturally, the others in the hall didn't understand this grain of truth that Han Li and the other cultivators clearly knew. They all whispered to each other in soft voices. There were a few shrewd individuals among them who started to doubt the authenticity of this immortal Wu, and were slightly hesitant to come forward to test themselves when they heard this. As such, the old Taoist was met with a moment of awkward silence. When Prince Zin saw this, he showed displeasure. However, those in the hall had been his good friends for many years, so he couldn't just say something unpleasant. He could only tactfully say to the old Taoist, "Immortal Master Wu, everyone here is but a common mortal. They have not yet witnessed immortal techniques and magic. Could Immortal Master please reveal your power and broaden everyone's horizons?" Having heard Prince Zin's words, everyone immediately grew quiet and waited to see what the Immortal Master would say. The old white-haired Taoist muttered to himself for a moment and openly agreed. Then he called for everyone to follow him to the open area in front of the large hall. Following the old Taoist's words, everyone flowed out of the large hall. Han Li also followed them out, but he did so indifferently. Surprisingly, that grandparent-grandchild pair didn't move. It seemed they were deeply worried about Han Li's appointment with them. Outside the guest hall, the old Taoist stood while surrounded by the crowd and started to cast magic. From the gestures his hands executed, his even stance, and his faint muttering of incantation in a low voice, his appearance grew even more mysterious. As such, the spectators around him held their breath and rigidly stared at the old Taoist without moving. But when Han Li heard this incantation, he inwardly rolled his eyes. At this moment the old Taoist joined his palms, and after he separated them, two roaring, fist-sized fireballs appeared in his hands. The nearby temperature suddenly rose, and the smell of flames filled the air. This was none other than the fireball technique that all cultivators with fire spiritual roots knew. But what was viewed as a common occurrence to cultivators immediately caused the nearby crowd to gasp in surprise. They felt it was truly inconceivable. But the next scene not only caused these mortals to continue with their stupefaction, but it also greatly shocked Han Li. That was because the old Taoist then changed his hand incantation and caused the roasting fireballs to gradually fuse and transform before the crowd's eyes. First, the combined flame gradually grew wings, then a pointed beak, immediately followed by thin claws and a tail, transforming into a small and exquisite flame bird. Could it be the firebird technique? Having seen this, Han Li's nerves tightened, not daring to believe his eyes in the slightest. The firebird technique was a genuine mid-grade magic technique, one that Han Li himself was unable to grasp. However, this mere chi condensation cultivator was unexpectedly able to use it on the spot. It was truly far too hard to believe. It was no wonder that Han Li wondered if he had seen incorrectly. However, Han Li's shock only lasted for a short moment. Soon after the old Taoist casted his magic, Han Li discovered a huge discrepancy between this firebird and the genuine firebird technique. Although this small bird created from fireballs resembled the appearance of the firebird magic technique, the discrepancy in size was far too great. When the firebird from the firebird technique spread its wings, it spanned over 3 meters. Instead, the firebird that this old Taoist created was only the size of a fist. It was fundamentally impossible to mention them on equal terms. But what truly convinced Han Li that this was but a false firebird technique was the magnitude of its fluctuation of magic power. The destructive power of the true firebird technique wasn't something a foundation establishment cultivator dared to receive. However, the magic power fluctuations of this small and exquisite sparrow-like firebird were exactly the same as a fireball. It wasn't greater in the least. It seemed it was merely a change of shape. After Han Li thought this through, he was in good spirits and found it quite funny. He had nearly been tricked by this small trick. It truly caused one to lose face. However, this person's flame manipulation technique was truly astonishing. Han Li didn't know whether he could match the fine control of flame that this qi condensation cultivator could accomplish. This old Taoist piqued Han Li's interest. In his next performance, the old Taoist thoroughly verified Han Li's thoughts. After seeing the small firebird spread its wings and soar, it immediately fell to the floor and transformed into a dog that cheerfully ran around the old Taoist. Not long after, the small dog transformed into a fire snake, then transformed a small person. This series of astonishing performances left these mortals dumbstruck and speechless with gaping mouths, having never seen magic techniques before. Then the old Taoist suddenly pointed a finger from his hand and made the final transformation of the flame into a small horse. The new form charged towards a small cherry sapling to the side. In the blink of an eye, the flame combusted and turned the sapling into ash. This was the end of the old Taoist show. At this moment, the spectators woke from their daze and did their utmost to hail the old Taoist, immortal Taoist. Their original doubts had long been cast away. How could they show the slightest bit of disbelief? Chapter 290, Young Prince. Prince Xin looked at the cheering crowd with a smile, feeling content in his heart. With regards to cultivators, they used to appear before great noble and influential clans, but for some unknown reason, they gradually stopped, not making much contact with the mortal world. As such, people such as the immortal master quickly became the stuff of folklore. Even as a kin of the royal family, this was the first cultivator Prince Xin had seen with his own eyes. The shocking display of magic techniques that the old Taoist revealed naturally caused Prince Xin to feel great face. Of course, Prince Xin did not know that during the period when cultivators still appeared in the secular world, the cultivation world had yet to establish the great immortal ascension assembly. During those times, low-level rogue cultivators as well as those from cultivation clans with no hope for foundation establishment gave up their aspirations and wished to live out their lives in the mortal world in wealth and splendor. However, with the appearance of the great immortal ascension assembly, cultivators could fight for their hopes of reaching foundation establishment. With this assembly, why would they choose to appear in the mortal world ever again? Naturally, they would be bitterly cultivating in seclusion deep within the mountains. Of course, those without the heart to cultivate like Yu Zhidong, who became a depraved cultivator in the secular world, were an exception, and their numbers were quite few. They would become honored guests of great, affluent noble clans and enter complete seclusion, not daring to allow outsiders to know of their presence. After all, to become a guest of some mortal clan was a matter that would cause extreme loss of face in the cultivation world. As such, although it wasn't rare for cultivators to appear in the secular world, those willing to associate with influential nobles and become their esteemed guests were extremely few in number. Also, the cultivators who mingled with mortals kept all knowledge of their actions extremely concealed in order to prevent their fellow cultivators from looking down on them. This crowd of guests truly hadn't seen other cultivators before. Naturally, they drew the frightening conclusion that the old Taoist was a celestial being from his beautiful fire manipulation technique. Under everyone's gaze, the white-haired old man returned to the large hall with a proud appearance. At this moment, these people couldn't wait to be tested and impatiently called out to him as Immortal Master. They immediately crowded about him, wanting Immortal Master Wu to examine them for spiritual roots. With vigorous spirit, the old white-haired Taoist looked through everyone who remained without refusing anyone. Unfortunately, the juniors of the Hua clan and the Qin clan didn't have any spiritual roots. They were only but common mortals. This information dealt a heavy blow to those who stepped forward to be examined. They could only dejectedly leave the old Taoist's side. It seemed immortal karma was truly not so easily come by. As such, people began to look at that increasingly prominent young fatty, Tong Jing's rare spiritual roots with envious glares. This caused the father and son standing at the old Taoist's side to smile widely, unable to contain their emotions. Han Li's expression remained the same as he saw Qin Yan bring back the dejected young masters and madams of the Qin clan. When they looked at Han Li, they had a somewhat wretched appearance. "I am still unconvinced. Why does that good-for-nothing have spiritual roots and we do? Aren't we 100 times better than him?" A dainty Qin clan young madam mumbled to herself with disbelief. "Enough, don't speak nonsense. With the life you have now, what's there to complain about?" Qin Yan's expression darkened as he turned his head to rebuke the young woman before sitting down. These words caused the Qin clan's well-known pungent loudmouth to pout. An unsatisfied expression still remained on her face. At this moment, old man Hua brought his grandchildren over. Without saying a word, he sat at Qin Yan's side. After they looked at each other, they suddenly wore bitter smiles as if they were fellow brothers sharing a mutual pain. Dear little brother Qin, it seems that the fatty Tong suddenly made it in this world, old man Hua said jokingly. Sai, this is quite normal. Anyone that has good children would have immediately become a patron of that immortal master. Qin Yan sighed again and said this with a begrudging tone. However, old man Hua and Qin Yan began to have a chat. But while they were chatting with each other, they were also diverting their attention toward the actions of immortal Master Wu and Prince Xin. At this moment, Prince Xin was looking at the juniors being tested for immortal roots. He then turned his head towards a young maid and whispered something to her. The young maid immediately went out the side door to carry out the mysterious order given to her. After that, Prince Xin turned his head around and coughed several times. He then leisurely said with a smile, following the celebration of my favored concubine's recovery, my son Quanzi and honorable nephew Tong will be apprenticed to immortal Master Wu. Everyone, please celebrate and give them your regards. With that said, Prince Xin extended his hands without the slightest of hesitation and fiercely clapped. Clap, clap. Applause soon rang out as pairs of cleanly dressed maids and servants walked in from outside the hall, with trays of fine foods and wine in their hands. Then with incomparable skill, they walked over to each table. Each wine cup was filled to the brim with shining pink wine. The large hall was filled with the scent of dishes and alcohol in the blink of an eye. Come, this prince will raise the first cup, Prince Xin loudly yelled, raising a wine cup respectfully given to him by a servant over his head. Cheers to the prince. Immediately after everyone drank a cup, the atmosphere of the hall surged. Not long after, the many guests started toasting cups to one another. The banquet had finally started. Prince Xin and that honorable nephew he called Jinger were talking and laughing during the feast, seemingly deepening their friendship. The expected arrogance of a prince wasn't seen. It was no wonder that Qin Yan and the others held such praise for Prince Xin. That immortal Master Wu didn't take a seat. Instead, when Prince Xin raised his wine cup, he wordlessly left. This caused many who thought to suck up to immortal Master Wu during the banquet to feel greatly disappointed. However, this kind of thinking was quite ordinary. How could a living immortal drink, party, and lavishly feast like a mortal? After they thought it through, these people gave up. Letting go of their previous intentions, they went a feast with the others. Halfway through the feast, Prince Xin called for a group of female dancers to perform an elegant and complicated palace dance to add to the enjoyment. This caused the atmosphere to soar to the climax. At this moment, a white-clothed youth who appeared about 20 years old entered the hall. He appeared very cultured and had a tall, thin stature. Each and every one of his movements held an elegant poise. This was absolutely the image of an ideal lover that many young women held in their hearts. Minger, come and greet your uncles. When Prince Qin saw this youth, he immediately happily called out to him. Fortunately, Prince Xin just happened to be at Qin Yan's table. Thus, the refined youth walked over with a smile. It is good to see you again, uncles, the youth courteously said. I don't dare to be called that. The young prince is too polite. Qin Yan, an old man, Hua didn't dare to overreach themselves and hastily stood to greet him. AI, you two are his seniors. Minger should be greeting you with courtesy. Why do you act like outsiders? Prince Xin interjected with some dissatisfaction. When Qin Yan and old man Hua heard this, they looked at each other and appeared somewhat embarrassed. Those words weren't incorrect. However, how could these two treat a member of the royal family as their junior? However, these two cunning old foxes changed the subject with a few quick words. Afterwards, they introduced the juniors behind them, allowing the exceptionally forthright prince to recognize them. This was a seldom opportunity for the juniors to make themselves known. Naturally, Han Li was included among those introduced. When Han Li was introduced, Prince Xin's eyes brightened as he repeated sized up Han Li several times with great interest. His face wore a mysterious smile. It was clear this person knew a few details of the rumors surrounding Han Li. This caused embarrassment to surge forth on his face again. Minger, come over here. Come meet this honorable brother Han. It was unknown what Prince Xin was thinking, but he unexpectedly had the young prince meet Han Li with a smile. Having heard his father, the young prince walked over and politely called out, Elder Brother Han. Then he cupped his hands toward Han Li, maintaining a gentle expression the entire time. Somehow, each moment carried out by this elegant and graceful young prince enchanted the several nearby young madams of age, leaving them unable to free themselves from his charm. Han Li returned the salute with a lost and foolish appearance, as if he were too nervous. In his heart, however, he felt himself in perilous situation, preventing him from maintaining his calm. When this young prince moved forward to salute Han Li, he unexpectedly gave him a feeling of danger similar to that of the mansion's steward. Although it didn't feel as strongly oppressive as that of the steward, it was undoubtedly the same feeling of danger. "What's the matter?" Han Li became extremely shocked as his heart sank into bewilderment. Chapter 291 Xiao Clan. Chapter 291 Xiao Clan. This handsome young prince naturally didn't know what Han Li was thinking. Instead, he said a few warm words of greetings to the previously acquainted Qin clan juniors and chatted with them, causing two of the young madams to blush. Their affection appeared to surge. When Han Li saw this, he coldly laughed inwardly. This young prince was indeed questionable. If these Qin clan madams truly threw themselves into his arms, there definitely wouldn't be a good result. Even if the young prince were to taste them and then leave them bare, Han Li wouldn't find it strange at all. After a short moment, Prince Xin said a few modest words to Qin Yan and brought the young prince away to socialize at another table. This caused the Qin clan juniors as well as the Hua pair that was speaking the prince to feel disappointment. Han Li took advantage of when nobody was paying attention and took a look at the back of the young prince, muttering under his breath as something flashed across his eyes. After several hours later, the feast came to an end. Once the guests were fully satisfied, they started to say their goodbyes to Prince Xin. Qin Yan had also brought Han Li and his juniors say their goodbyes. They then departed from the front gate of Prince Xin's residence. Just as Lord Qin thought to have Han Li board the carriage with him, Han Li suddenly asked something, much to his surprise. "Uncle Qin could tell me who those two are, do you know?" Although Han Li's words were polite, Lord Qin didn't dare to slight him. He hastily turned his head to look and answered, "Honorable nephew Han is talking about those two. Yi, that's the lord of the Xiao clan. He's the owner of a famous restaurant in Yuejing, the Leisurely Cloud. Since he is a very low-profile character, I'm not very familiar with him. As for the unfamiliar youngster by his side, he should be his grandson." After Qin Yan saw that Han Li was looking at this grandfather-grandchild pair, he wore an expression of surprise. He didn't know why Han Li suddenly became interested in these two. "Oh, so it's like that. Uncle Qin, you should leave first. I will return to the residence a bit later." Han Li thoughtfully nodded his head and then replied. Without waiting for Qin Yan's reply, he slowly walked next to the small path around the residence's wall. Qin Yan blankly looked at Han Li's back and then stealthily turned his gaze towards the Xiao clan lord, feeling a bit puzzled. But after a bit of thought, Qin Yan decided to board the carriage and ordered his servant to drive away. Thus, the Qin clan carriages departed from the front gate of Prince Xin's residence and returned to the Qin residence in the East District. Those Qin clan young masters and madams simply didn't discover Han Li's disappearance. Instead, they were in the back two carriages discussing what had transpired at Prince Xin's residence today. They were incomparably excited. They felt that, although they didn't have immortal karma, they had stories to later flaunt off to their friends once they returned. After Han Li walked for the time it took to make a cup of tea, he eventually reached the back gate of the prince's mansion after walking around the tall walls of Prince Xin's estate. At this moment, the tall back gates were securely closed. Not a single person was in sight. Han Li smiled and felt this was just right. This way, he wouldn't have to use any concealment magic techniques. He arrogantly stood in front of the back gate and raised his head to look at the sky with idle boredom. After a moment of time, Han Li became blankly lost in thought. Suddenly, Han Li felt there were people approaching with coward backs. He lowered his head and took a cold look. The only people he saw were the Xiao clan lord and the young woman dressed in male clothing. They walked over from the other side of the residence's gate. When the old man saw Han Li, his figure became sluggish and exposed an appearance of hesitation. On the other hand, the young woman by his side wore an extremely curious expression and didn't hold the slightest appearance of fear. The old man immediately realized something, and his expression immediately became tranquil. He walked forward in large strides, the young woman closely following after him. This junior Xiao Zhen greatly thanks senior for the lenient treatment inside the prince's mansion. If this one has offended you, junior is willing to apologize. After walking in front of Han Li, this Lord Zio was still unable to determine how deep Han Li's cultivation was and became shocked. Feeling even more reverence toward Han Li, he rushed to salute him and respectfully apologize. Han Li's expression didn't change after receiving the salute. He then faintly said, "You aren't bitterly cultivating in some secluded area with abundant spiritual qi. Why have you appeared in Yuejing? Could it be you were reluctant to depart from your worldly affairs and splendor? Were you unwilling to continue your cultivation?" Regardless of the outcome, Han Li first accused the old man of an unwarranted charge in order to easily overwhelm the other party and impose his own will. This would allow later affairs to flow more smoothly. Senior misunderstands. Because this junior's age is far too old, he no longer has a chance to reach Foundation establishment. Thus, the clan appointed him as the steward in charge of our sources of revenue in the secular world. It isn't about returning to the secular world and staying there. When the azure-robed old man heard Han Li's words, his heart relaxed and he replied with a calm appearance. "You are the disciple of a clan." Han Li didn't easily let them off and closely questioned this. Han Li wanted to get a feeling on where this grandfather-grandchild pair stood. If they were from a few famous cultivation clan, Han Li would be unwilling to provoke them. However, the surname Zio didn't seem to be from a well-known clan. After he heard Han Li's question, the old man hesitated for a moment. He turned his head to the young woman by his side before sincerely replying. "This junior is from the Yun province's Feng River Mountain Streams Zio clan." Feng River Mountain Streams Zio clan. Han Li wrinkled his brow and carefully thought about it. He was certain he had never heard of such a name. Senior doesn't need to think so much about it. The Zio clan this junior belongs to is but a small clan. Having never heard of it is a normal matter. Lord Zio's face sank as he said this mockingly. Han Li was a bit surprised. After he sized up Lord Zio several times, he calmly asked with his normal expression, "You speak quite straightforwardly. Are you not afraid that I would immediately exterminate you too?" The old man didn't react to Han Li's words. However, that young woman appeared to be a small kitten that had her tail stepped on. Her expression tightened as she immediately put her hand on her waist. There was no question that the bulge she was grasping was a storage pouch. But soon after, the young woman saw that neither her grandfather nor Han Li truly moved to act. With a red face, she put her hand away but was at a loss of where she should place it. She dilemma appeared extremely adorable. When the old man saw this, he glanced at the young woman affectionately before turning his head to Han Li and saying with a bitter smile, "Although this one is incapable of seeing through the deepness of your esteemed self's cultivation, he is certain you are a Foundation establishment cultivator. This one clearly understands this. Junior doesn't believe that he has any magic tools, medicine pills, or any such treasures that a high-level cultivator would covet. If Senior truly was such a person, Junior would be unable to do anything. With this one's meager cultivation, running and resistance is futile. One may as well surrender and fulfill Senior's wishes instead of having him take out his anger on this one's entire clan. Junior only asks that Senior treat this one leniently and let this one's granddaughter go. She is this Junior's sole remaining descendant." The old man's last few words were extremely dismal. This caused the young woman to become extremely frightened and angry. She hastily said with discontent, "Grandpa, you need not be afraid. If he truly wishes to act against you, we will fight together. Then we won't need to fear him." When Han Li heard the words of Lord Zio and the young woman, he stared blankly for a moment. But once he fully understood what the pair planned to do, he became amused. Apart from this old man's dreary words and appearance of selfless martyrdom, Han Li didn't see the slightest sign that he was seeking death. In fact, his magic power fluctuations indicated he was storing power in preparation. There wasn't the slightest intention of surrender. If it was clear he wanted to kill them for treasures, they intended to stake it all in a fight. That young woman was also quite amusing. Although her words were indignant, whenever she wasn't looking at Han Li with her black shining eyes, she was incessantly looking around, frequently exposing a crafty air. However, this young woman didn't know that ever since Han Li had completed the first layer of the Great Development Technique, his spiritual sense was far stronger than that of common cultivators. Her petty tricks had already fallen into Han Li's grasp. Han Li inwardly thought, perhaps this Feng River Mountain Stream Zio clan was something off the top of his minds. As for whether there is such a clan, even he doubts it. Thus, Han Li wore a mysterious smile on his face as he silently looked at the two of them. Since he neither said these two could leave, nor did he make any hostile movements, the grandfather-grandchild pair stayed still for the time. From the beginning, the old man and the young woman had preserved their solemn and grim appearance. But after some time had passed, Han Li indifferent stared at them with a lazy appearance. The old man Zio and the young woman eventually looked at each other in dismay. What does Senior intend to do? The young woman was unable to endure in the end. Breaking past the old man's restricting gaze, she jumped in front of Han Li and loudly asked, pointing at Han Li with an expression of grievance. Chapter 292, The Powerful. Chapter 292, The Powerful. Han Li's expression didn't change, so she couldn't make out any anger from his gaze. However, the old man could clearly feel cold intent coming from Han Li's body. Afraid, the old man had yet to pull the young woman behind him when Han Li's body released a shocking grandeur. The fearsome spiritual pressure that was accumulated actually caused the nearby young woman to fly back 7 or 8 steps. She didn't have the slightest power to resist. Fortunately, the old man's eyes and hands were swift. His figure flashed behind the young woman, his hands clapping her shoulders to stop the young woman's body from being pushed further back. At this moment, the young woman's face was as pale as paper. After personally experiencing the fearsomeness of Han Li's cultivation, she couldn't help but lose herself to fear and look at her grandfather behind her. The old man's appearance was equivalently unsightly. Before this, the old man had a few bits of confidence that with their combined strength, they would be able to escape Han Li's grasp. But now that they experienced a small demonstration of his true strength, this thought was thrown away. Foundation establishment cultivators were fearsome and far exceeded what he had imagined. They absolutely weren't figures that a small cultivator could provoke. The old man broke out in an endless old sweat. He had actually been planning to carry out a small trick on Han Li with his granddaughter's help. The old man had never seen an expert like Han Li before, a foolish cultivator who only knew how to bitterly cultivate. Fortunately, he had accumulated a vast experience, so his response was faster than average. Could it be this person was an old eccentric who had lived for over 100 years, keeping his appearance young through some sort of appearance-halting technique? The more the old man thought about it, the more he felt this was true, and the greater the terror he felt in his heart. After the old man felt the spiritual pressure coming from Han Li's body grow increasingly stronger as time passed, the old man couldn't help but gulp and immediately beg with a trembling stomach, "Senior, please let us off leniently. This one's granddaughter was far too young. She doesn't know what is high or low. Senior, please calm down." After Han Li gave the old man a cold glance, he suddenly stopped emitting the frightening grandeur from his body. It seemed Han Li saw through true meaning behind his words. In an instant, the pressure had become completely hidden as if entrenched in deep water. With hands trembling from fear, old man Zio took his hands off the shoulder of the young woman who had become well-behaved long ago. After taking a stealthy look at Han Li, she immediately turned her gaze away, not daring to directly look at him. Her current behavior was as different as heaven and earth from the fearless expression she had shown before. However, this dainty young woman was now extremely startled pale, much like a frightened small bird. It was a lovingly heart-stirring appearance. TL Moe. Seeing this, Han Li felt something being revealed before his eyes. This was the first time he had discovered a woman who held such a fragile beauty. It truly moved the heart and soul. Her overall appearance gave him a breathtaking feeling, and he couldn't help but glance several times. After carefully looking over the young woman's appearance, although he made out that she wasn't very old, only 14 or 15 years of age, she was a rarely seen beauty. Given a few more years, she would most likely mature into an extraordinary beauty that would drive men mad. Because Han Li's gaze toward the young girl was a bit too strange, the old man's heart furiously sunk when he saw this. Could it be he had us come here because her appearance was to his liking? Did he take a fancy to my granddaughter's beauty? That isn't good at all. With this person's great magic power, we won't be able to resist him. The old man's imagination ran wild with deep worry. Since you two aren't willing to reveal your clan, you are probably clanless rogue cultivations. I won't make it difficult for you. I had you come here for a trade, after which you may leave. After a long moment of silence, Han Li eventually spoke. A trade. The old man blankly stared. He faintly felt that he had been thinking incorrectly. That's right, I took a fancy to something you possessed and wanted to propose a trade with you, Han Li replied with a dull expression. When the old man heard this, He couldn't help but look at the young girl and think, does he want me to trade away my own granddaughter? But when he thought about it more, it seemed truly unlikely, because apart from the several glances he took a moment ago, he hadn't taken another look at his granddaughter. With this thought, the old man relaxed a bit and said with solemn respect, I don't know what caught Senior's eye, but since we are only juniors, we will naturally offer it to Senior. However, this small old man doesn't know what item this Senior wants. The old man's last words revealed the misgivings in his heart. When Han Li saw the other party's tact, his appearance eased up and he revealed a slight smile. What cultivation technique did you use inside the hall? You were actually able to conceal your spiritual qi so well that the qi condensation Taoist priest wasn't able to see through your identities. Han Li didn't directly reply to the old man. Instead, he asked him a question with a mild tone. After revealing such a strong face, he naturally used a slightly appeasing tactic. Using both hard and soft methods was the ideal strategy. When they heard Han Li's question, the two of them couldn't help but look at each other with doubt before saying with some hesitation, Senior, this one also doesn't know what cultivation technique he used. Surprisingly, Han Li didn't get angry. Instead, he continued to look at the old man with a stoic expression. He knew that since the other party mentioned this, they would give him a fair explanation. Sure enough, the old man then cautiously continued. The cultivation technique this one used actually came from a badly damaged, nameless Taoist book. It didn't even mention the name of this spiritual qi restraining magic technique. We only casually practiced it. Nameless Taoist book. As for where it came from, don't tell me it was passed down within your clan. After Han Li heard this, his face revealed interest, his words carrying a profound meaning. If this magic technique was passed down within a clan, every great cultivation sect would have madly fought to get a hold of this technique. However, Han Li had never heard of such a cultivation technique before. Senior sees clearly. This Taoist book was something my granddaughter found inside a cave while exploring an uninhabited mountain. Apart from this qi restraining chant, we didn't understand anything else from the book. If Senior wants it, Junior will go back to his residence and offer it to you. The old man promised with a compensating smile. When Han Li heard the old man's words, he revealed a satisfied expression and said, Be at ease, I won't take your items for nothing. You two return first and wait for me at your residence. Make sure you consider what you want in exchange for it. Han Li's voice was extremely calm, but after he said these words, he suddenly extended his finger, whereupon two soybean-sized green lights shot out from Han Li's finger. In an instant, it flew into the bodies of the old man and young girl without leaving a trace. Senior, you? The old man was frightened and angry. He didn't think that after he finished speaking, Han Li would suddenly act against the two. Although he didn't know what happened, he was certain it wasn't anything good. The young girl also went pale with fright. There is no need to worry. These are only tracing marks. With these, I can accurately find you and eliminate you and your grandchild at any time should the need ever arise, Han Li explained indifferently. After hearing these words, the old man let out a breath and bitterly laughed in his heart many times. This senior truly didn't leave any holes, not even the slightest opening for them. With this on their bodies, if they tried to take advantage of the situation and escape, it was likely they wouldn't make it very far. However, the old man Zio clearly understood the reason behind Han Li's action. If the other party didn't do this, it was likely that the old man would take his granddaughter and immediately slip away. After all, to trade with an expert that could easily kill them was far too scary, especially when the stronger party seemed moody. While there were enormous benefits, the old man would normally require time to think it over and see whether it was worth the risk. However, it seemed that now he must carry out this trade whether he wanted to or not. He could only hope that, after the other party wouldn't eliminate them after receiving the book. In the short time he made contact with Han Li, he truly wasn't able to make out Han Li's temperament in the end. He only knew that not only was this figure's magic power profound, but that he was also extremely troublesome. He would use every opportunity and method, and there was nothing he wouldn't do. Very well. These juniors will wait at their dwelling for Senior to arrive. The old man could only pretend to act as if nothing had happened and say this with great respect. Very good, I will come to take the item at night. You two had best behave. As Han Li said this, his body gradually became indistinct. He disappeared without a trace once the last word behave left his mouth, leaving only air in his place. Seeing that Han Li revealed this extremely mysterious skill, Old man Zio could only give up with a deathly pale face. He dispiritedly called out to the young girl and slowly walked back home. However, the old man didn't realize that when his granddaughter saw Han Li using those ghost-like movements, great envy flashed in her eyes. Even when the old man called out to her, she reacted as if she had woken up from a dream. As the young girl followed after the old man, she turned her head to look at the place where Han Li had disappeared with surprising reluctance. That child is truly mischievous. Hiding in a nearby tree, Han Li coldly looked at the two as they departed and shook his head. TL, mischievous, originally Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Although the body is small, the craftiness is great. Chapter 293, Infiltration. Chapter 293, Infiltration. Han Li was quite familiar with the obsessed expression the young woman revealed as she departed. The very first time he saw Li Huayuan control that huge flood dragon, he also had this envious gaze. With this thought, Han Li felt that this beautiful young woman was truly interesting. After he slightly smiled, he silently disappeared from the tree. He reappeared within the tall walls of the prince's mansion. At this moment, not only did Han Li use the invisibility technique that would hide him from mortals, but he also used the Qi restraining technique, a Qi concealment technique that cultivators could use only after achieving foundation establishment. He quickly flashed by the scurrying maids and servants within the prince's residence, without anyone noticing anything out of the ordinary. After a moment, Han Li infiltrated into the back residence of the prince's mansion. He secretly hid behind a pillar at some desolate corridor and watched everything nearby with a cold gaze. Not long after, a somewhat pretty maid walked nearby. Han Li suddenly shot out a ball of yellow light the size of a fist from his finger, striking the maid's head. The maid suddenly staggered as if she were about to fall onto the floor. Without waiting for her to fall, Han Li had already leaped out to grab her and flew back to hide behind the pillar. With great skill, Han Li straightened the young maid's weak body and arranged it so that she faced him. He then opened his mouth and spouted out azure spiritual qi, which entered her tightly closed eyes. At this moment, the young maid's eyelids started to move, and she slowly opened her eyes. Just as the young maid was waking up, she saw a pair of gold-yellow eyes staring at her coldly. Just as she thought about yelling loudly and putting up a struggle, strange yellow streaks of light suddenly shot out from those eyes directly into her own. The young maid immediately felt the world spin as her vision was filled with a golden-yellow color. Then, with a tilted head, she lost consciousness. Han Li took another look at the young maid, who fainted, and lightly sighed, before lightly wiping away the sweat on her face. Although he could only use the soul-controlling technique for a short amount of time, it truly consumed far too much of his attention and felt quite strenuous. It was no wonder that this magic technique was classified as a worthless foundation establishment technique. Although this magic technique would make the target obediently follow the caster as a slave for a short amount of time, it had great limitations. As such, the cultivators who practiced this magic technique were truly few in number. First of all, this magic technique could only be used on mortals. It didn't have the slightest effect on cultivators. Even if there was a great disparity in cultivation, so long as there was spiritual power coursing through their heads, other cultivators could easily counteract the technique's bewitchment effect. Next, not only must whoever wished to practice this technique be at foundation establishment, their spiritual sense must be far stronger than average. Thus, the overwhelming majority of foundation establishment cultivators weren't able to practice this technique. With these two restrictions, cultivators with interest in practicing this magic technique were pitifully few. However, this was no problem for Han Li. Han Li had originally been anxious that he would only be able to grasp a limited set of foundation establishment magic techniques. The last time he was in the Heaven's Knowledge Pavilion, he had read the incantation of this magic technique and memorized it out of curiosity. Once he returned to his cave to cultivate it, he wasn't met with the slightest resistance and was able to smoothly succeed. This greatly surprised Han Li. He now attempted to use the magic technique on this girl, and as expected, he succeeded. After taking a cautious glance in every direction, he softly extended his finger, and a small ball of milky white light emerged on his fingertip. Pressed against the maid's head, the ball of light soon entered her forehead and disappeared. The young maid woke up and immediately stood. She blankly looked at Han Li without speaking. What is the background of the steward? When did he enter the prince's residence? Where does he often like to go? Who does he often meet with outside the prince's residence? Han Li looked at the young maid and rapidly shot out a series of questions. He started off with this maid, the one dispatched by Prince Xin to find the young prince at the start of the banquet. It seemed the status of this servant wasn't low. If he used her, Han Li might actually obtain a bit of reliable information. Which steward is master asking about? The young maid asked with an expressionless face. The prince's residence has more than one steward. Puzzled, Han Li asked with slight surprise. The residence has many stewards in charge of taking care of the prince's affairs. For example, there is Steward Li, who is in charge of making purchases, and Steward Dai, who is in charge of supervising the residence. The young maid continued with blank eyes. Which steward was greeting guests at the residence's gate? Han Li softly asked after wrinkling his brow. That is Steward Wang. He has the greatest authority. He is the one I am referring to, Han Li added with a bit of anxiety. He didn't know how long he could use this magic technique to control her mind. Naturally, he had to hurry and ask about the important matters first. Otherwise, he would have to waste more effort after the young maid awakened. According to the seniors in the residence, Steward Wang grew up together with the prince and accompanied him during his education. He eventually followed the prince for 50 to 60 years. Apart from a routine monthly trip in which he follows the prince into the Forbidden City, he normally doesn't leave the prince's residence and won't contact anybody outside. If he did meet anyone, it would be among the prince's good friends. As for his relationship with the young prince, it's a bit strange. I've heard from the young prince's previous wet nurse that 10 years ago, the young prince used to have a very violent temperament, and his relationship with Steward Wang was anything but good. He even slapped Steward Wang in public before. But throughout the past 10 years, the young prince's entire attitude changed dramatically. Not only did he become polite and refined, but he also became extremely respectful towards Steward Wang, even holding a ceremony to become his junior. Prince Xin was greatly pleased by this, claiming that they had the gods' blessings all along, the young girl flatly said. When Han Li heard this, his expression didn't change. He coldly smiled in his heart. Although it sounded like this Steward Wang didn't seem suspicious in the least, the exceptional change in the young prince's character was enough for Han Li to be certain there was some sort of hidden relationship between the two. In addition, for these two to cause a foundation establishment cultivator to feel danger, they certainly weren't common mortals. As for the steward's mysterious background, Han Li didn't feel like investigating it too deeply. He only wanted to make sure the steward wasn't from the Devil Dao. He didn't care whether the other party was righteous or evil or whatever secrets he held. If he could do less, Han Li naturally wouldn't go asking for trouble. After this interrogation, Han Li figured it was most likely that the young prince and the steward had no relationship with the Devil Dao. After all, the young prince had been exceptional from the beginning. There hadn't been a sudden change in ability. If the Devil Dao truly started setting this up over 10 years ago, Han Li could only remain speechless. With this thought, Han Li sighed and commanded, "Where does immortal Master Wu live? Lead me there." "As you wish, master." The young maid obediently stood and walked. Han Li secretly followed her while continuing to conceal himself. With the young girl's guidance, Han Li passed through 7 to 8 large courtyards and arrived at a peaceful terrace. At that moment, the young girl then stopped. "Papa." Suddenly, Han Li lightly patted the maid's back 2 times using a palm filled with white light. Afterwards, his figure flashed and shot behind a large tree. "Yi, isn't this the venerable immortal master's residence? What am I doing here?" The young maid then blinked 2 times with all her strength and suddenly yelped. The blankness in her eyes could no longer be seen. "Who is causing a commotion outside? Didn't this humble Taoist instruct not to let people come here and disturb his cultivation?" The old Taoist priest's annoyed voice came from a room in the courtyard. When the young maid heard this, her face immediately turned white from fear. Without thinking about why she appeared at this location, she ran away, flustered. Creak, the door opened. With the appearance of stereotypical Taoist immortal, the old white-haired Taoist walked out. But after he saw there was nobody in the courtyard, his face revealed a sense of confusion. "What's going on? I clearly heard someone talking. I thought the prince had come to find me. Where did the unpleasant person who interrupted my cultivation run off to?" The old man stood in the courtyard and looked in every direction before furiously returning to his room. After he shut his door and faced the room, however, he was completely dumbfounded. He only saw Han Li sitting at the table, silently looking at the old Taoist with a beaming smile. He appeared to hold great interest in him. "Who are you?" the old Taoist quickly asked as his expression dramatically changed. He then reflexively raised his hand and summoned a fireball. "What I want is you. Don't worry, I won't act against you so casually." Han Li smiled, speaking as if hadn't seen the old Taoist's fireball. His words didn't hold the slightest bit of hostility. "Humph, your esteemed self infiltrated this room with great stealth, yet you still dare to mystify yourself. See if this humble Taoist doesn't." The old Taoist had long been accustomed to flattery from his recent days in the prince's residence and instinctively reacted, yelling with a stern voice. However, after he used the Heaven's Eye technique to look at Han Li, his originally furious face immediately became frozen and turned white soon after. Your esteemed self is a Foundation establishment senior." The old man stuttered, unwilling to believe it. "Didn't you already determine that with your magic technique?" Han Li indifferently said this with a controlled smile on his face. "Senior, do not blame me." This junior had never seen a senior who had cultivated to Foundation establishment before. The highest I have seen were Qi condensation cultivators of the 11th or 12th layer. I was truly incapable of judging seniors' cultivation. I only knew that seniors' cultivation is unfathomably deep. When the old Taoist heard him, he hastily extinguished his fireball as if he had woken from a dream. He stepped forward with a salute and repeatedly explained with a careful, apologetic smile on his face. Han Li was surprised that the old Taoist hadn't exposed fear like the old man Zio had. Instead, he faintly revealed a sense of excitement. But after some thought, Han Li clearly understood the other party's thoughts. This white-haired old Taoist was part the prime of his life, but still lingering at the 6th layer. He was most likely a rogue cultivator with extremely poor aptitude. As such, he was unable to meet cultivators with profound magic power. Even if he weren't a rogue cultivator, he only interacted with Taoist brothers with cultivation bases similar to his own. Now that he saw such a high-level cultivator, he naturally regarded it as such a fortuitous encounter that was hard to come by. He mostly likely planned to fish up some benefits. Having thought this, Han Li couldn't help but smile. If the other party was able to satisfy him, he wouldn't mind giving him a few benefits. Han Li immediately turned his gaze to the old Taoist and leisurely said, "Your guess is correct. I really am a Foundation establishment cultivator." When the old white-haired Taoist heard Han Li's words, his expression became even more respectful. Naturally, the happiness in his eyes grew a bit stronger as well. "I don't know why Senior suddenly appeared here. Does Senior wish to command this Junior to take care of a certain matter?" the old Taoist respectfully asked. This person was on the right track. He knew that if he wanted to receive a few benefits from Han Li, he naturally had to do something in return. When Han Li heard this, he expressed satisfaction, and with a faint smile he said, "First, let's talk about your origins. Today I saw your show at the prince's residence. Your fire-controlling technique was quite good." Han Li gave a minor praise, but little did the Taoist know that it was actually sincere. When the old Taoist heard Han Li's words, an astonished expression flashed across his face. He hadn't thought that this senior had seen his performance. He hastily replied with a humble tone, "It's unfortunate that Senior had seen my poor performance. Junior only manipulated the flame technique. I would have taken something else out to show, but my other techniques are a mess. As for this Junior's origins, it isn't anything notable. When Junior was young, he unexpectedly obtained the fierce Yang arts from a cultivator on death's door. It was at this moment that he entered the world of cultivation. However, it was unfortunate that Junior's aptitude was too poor, and without any guidance, he could only barely cultivate to the 6th layer. Your fire-controlling technique was a technique from that book." Han Li's interest was stirred, and he asked this soon after. "It is. This fire-controlling technique was something Junior had cultivated until he reached a bottleneck. Without any method to progress, he could only grudgingly polish and refine some small tricks. But after several tens of years of improvements and modifications, it has become Junior's greatest accomplishment." "It was something you researched on your own?" Han Li was inwardly startled. He further examined the old white-haired man several more times, revealing a bit of amazement. "That's right, Senior. Junior took this meager magic of his and turned it into a book, the Flame-Handling Arts. If it isn't beneath Senior, Junior can take it out and give a pointer or two." The old Taoist saw that Han Li seemed interested in his fire control technique and was struck with inspiration. He hastily took out a thin book from his storage pouch and respectfully handed it to Han Li. When Han Li saw this, he was slightly startled. Truthfully speaking, although Han Li felt that this flame transformation technique was quite strange, he didn't feel a great desire to obtain this technique. He didn't think that this small fire-controlling technique would be of great use to his current self. However, the old Taoist took the initiative to show it to him and caused him to feel surprised. Han Li easily received it and took a moment to browse through its contents. At the start, Han Li perused the book with an indifferent attitude. But as he looked through it, although his expression was as peaceful as ever, he gradually became shocked in his heart. The minor knack of flame-shaped transformation mentioned at the start of the book held no great meaning to the current Han Li. It was merely flashy, but hollow inside. But towards the end, the old Taoist mentioned a few vague concepts regarding flexibly applying magic techniques and some feasible practice methods, providing many insights for Han Li. After a short moment, Han Li gently closed the book. Now was not the time to research techniques. When he had free time, he would properly analyze the contents of this book. He was confident that this meeting increased his understanding and usage of magic techniques by a whole level. This book, I will take it. I know that although you said would give me a pointer of 2, I truly want this book to be gifted to me. As a senior, I naturally won't leave you empty-handed. I have a few books on Taoist magic, magic tools of every rank, and even a few medicine pills of great use to a qi condensation cultivator. You can choose one from the 3 options in exchange for this book. I'll give you the time it takes to make a cup of tea to come to a decision. After Han Li took a deep look at the old Taoist, he said a few words that unceasingly excited the old man. Many thanks, Senior. Many thanks for Senior's favor. The old white-haired Taoist's complexion flushed red. He even trembled a bit from excitement. Han Li faintly smiled and didn't say anything else. Instead, he closed his eyes, leaned against the chair, and rested. The old Taoist started to anxiously pace in circles around the room, finding it extremely difficult to choose one over another. How is it? Have you made up your mind? After a moment passed, Han Li felt it was about time. He serenely asked this after having opened his eyes. Senior, I've decided. Junior only wants medicinal pills that will allow qi condensation cultivators to make a breakthrough. After Han Li's inquiry, the old Taoist eventually came to a decision and said this with certainty. When Han Li heard this, he didn't reveal the slightest of surprise. He reckoned that the other party would choose medicinal pills. After all, magic tools and Taoist books could be acquired after he made cultivation breakthroughs. Thus, after giving a light nod, Han Li brushed his gown sleeve against the table and left behind 2 small jade bottles. These 2 bottles contain yellow dragon pills. They are substantially effective on cultivators up to the 10th layer. Take them, Han Li calmly said. 10th layer of qi condensation. Many thanks for Senior's great favor. Many thanks. The old Taoist looked at those 2 bottles of medicinal pills with a fiery gaze. After repeatedly expressing his thanks, he excitedly took the 2 bottles into his hands. He then impatiently opened the lid of the bottle, and after sniffing it 2 times, he had a completely satisfied appearance. I actually came to find you for another matter. After performing a task, I will naturally give you even more compensation. After Han Li saw the other party carefully put away the medicine bottles, he calmly talked about the main reasons he came there. With the heavy reward attached, Han Li was confident the other party would be tempted. As a result, the old Taoist immediately beamed with joy after hearing this and said, Senior, please do not hesitate to tell me of this matter. Junior will carry it out by any means. When Han Li heard this, he faintly smiled and responded, It's nothing major. For the next few months, I want you to pay attention to the whereabouts of your disciple, the young prince and steward Wang. If anything abnormal happens, all you have to do is tell me. Although Han Li de-emphasized the matter, when the old Taoist heard this, he was stunned. He truly didn't think that this senior would want him to monitor 2 mortals. Furthermore, one of them would be the beloved disciple he had just accepted. Having remained perplexed despite much thought, the old Taoist took a careful at Han Li and asked with a probing tone, Could Senior please illuminate this junior? Could it be there is something amiss with these 2? The old Taoist asked this very carefully, fearing he would offend this expert. Han Li's face didn't show the slightest dissatisfaction. He didn't immediately reply to the cultivator's question. After a moment of deliberation, he said in a soft voice, In truth, I'm a cultivator from Yellow Maple Valley of the 7 sects. The Devil Dao is currently invading our state of UA. Even a rogue cultivator like you should be aware of this. I suspect that these 2 have a relationship with the Devil Dao. Thus, I need to have someone help me pay attention to their whereabouts, just in case. Although Han Li believed Steward Wang and the young prince weren't associated with the Devil Dao, it was better to be careful. He was unclear about certain details of their background and felt in his heart that there was something greatly concerning about them. Thus, he sought this old Taoist in advance to monitor the pair's actions. However, he didn't directly mention any of his actual concerns to the old Taoist and simply mentioned the Devil Dao as a convenient excuse. After all, the feeling of danger that Han Li perceived from the two was purely instinctive, so he obviously couldn't say this out loud. Chapter 295, Keeping an Appointment. A Relationship with the Devil Dao. When the old Taoist heard that Han Li was a Yellow Maple Valley cultivator, he didn't show any surprise. This was a matter he had previously guessed. Apart from the seven sects, cultivators at Foundation establishment were truly too few. However, when he heard that his own disciple and Steward Wang were possibly implicated with the Devil Dao, his face immediately became green. The reputation of the Devil Dao in the state of Yue was nearly synonymous with bloodshed and ruthlessness. A small qi condensation cultivator such as the old Taoist naturally knew of this. Senior misunderstands. I truly examined that young prince's body. He doesn't possess the slightest magic power. After a moment of apprehensive and careful thought, he found this hard to believe. After all, he had spent some time with the young prince, and truly hadn't been able to observe anything similar to the rumors of the Devil Dao. After Han Li heard his words, he didn't respond with any superfluous words. He simply said this with a serene expression. As for whether these two are with the Devil Dao, you will be personally paying attention to this in the future. If you discover anything abnormal, you know what to do. I don't require you take any harmful actions towards those two. You simply have to keep an eye on them. Additionally, you mustn't perform any probing actions in any mesra. If the other party realizes that you've uncovered their identities, it's likely your life will be forfeit. Han Li's final words were a warning to the old Taoist. The doubt in the eyes of the old white-haired Taoist immediately disappeared after hearing Han Li's words. Moreover, he now had a terrified appearance. After some slight hesitation, he opened his mouth and said with slight fear, "If by chance these two discover that I'm monitoring them, what should I do? This humble Taoist's magic power is meager. I truly fear I will have to turn down Senior's great task." Having heard this, Han Li wrinkled his brow. This old Taoist appeared to change his mind and wanted to give this up, but this wouldn't do. It seemed Han Li would have to give him a few more benefits. With this thought, Han Li touched his storage pouch and took out an item, lightly placing it on the table. Monitor the two. If there are any dangers, I will give you this high-grade magic tool to defend yourself with. After this matter has ended, this magic tool will officially become your own. Han Li insipidly said to the old Taoist as he pointed to the purple bead emitting a faint radiance on the table. High-grade magic tool. When the old Taoist heard this, his mind immediately shook. Normally, he would be pathetically short on money. He wouldn't have enough money to afford a mid-grade magic tool, let alone a high-grade magic tool. This purple light bead will immediately create a barrier of light to protect your body after you pour magic power into it. I'm confident there aren't many qi condensation cultivators that will be able to break through it. This should be enough to cope with most of the dangers you'll face. Han Li patiently said with an unchanging expression. This is a defensive magic tool. After hearing its introduction, the old Taoist's eyes became passionate. Defensive magic tools were the most precious and rare kind of magic tool. If this old Taoist were to spend the rest of his years gathering spirit stones, it was likely he still wouldn't have enough to buy a high-grade defensive magic tool. Alright, this old Taoist will spare no effort to complete this task. After the old white-haired Taoist's face calmed down, he finally clenched his teeth and agreed. It seemed the proverb, birds die in pursuit of food, men die in pursuit of money, applied to the cultivation world as well. When Han Li saw the old Taoist agree to take on this greatly dangerous task, although his face revealed a smile, he inwardly sighed. Place this spiritual mark on your body. That way, if anything happens, I can immediately come find you and perhaps save your life. Additionally, I will reward you with an additional bottle of yellow dragon pills after this matter ends. By using this method and placing the spiritual mark on the old Taoist's body, Han Li was using both force and incentive. After the old Taoist saw Han Li do this, he was slightly startled, but he feigned ignorance of Han Li's true intent and repeatedly expressed his thanks. Seeing the old Taoist being tactful, Han Li couldn't help but smile as he took his leave. Then, after the old Taoist respectfully sent him off, he quietly departed from the prince's residence. Han Li didn't intend to immediately return to the Qin residence. Instead, he casually found a tea house and calmly contemplated as he tasted the tea. He started to mull over the recent affairs that had occurred to see whether or not there were anything he had done inappropriately or overlooked. He regularly examined and reflected on all his previous affairs, a habit that Han Li had acquired over the years. Only by continuously reducing his own failings and making up for his deficiencies would Han Li be able to come out unscathed from the crises of the cultivation world at every step. Thus, Han Li sat at the tea house for a long while. When the sky had gradually begun to darken, he left the tea house under a waiter's strange gaze. He only called for a single pot of tea and spent half a day drinking it. This was the first time the waiter had seen such a customer. He would later become unable to help but mention this to his friends, causing Han Li to be the unexpected butt of a few mortals' jokes. The unfortunate Han Li would forever remain oblivious to this loss of face. The agreed time by which he would meet old man Xiao had not yet arrived. However, Han Li never intended to truly arrive at the appointed time. Even though he was always one to be punctual, it was better to arrive early and prevent them from playing any tricks on him. After walking for a moment, Han Li suddenly wrinkled his brow. He felt the marks of the Xiao grandparent-grandchild pair appear in the west when they should have been in the east as agreed, causing Han Li to feel a bit angry. With a cold snort, Han Li took advantage of the lack of spectators and threw his divine wind boat to the sky. He and the boat turned into a streak of white light that rushed through the sky in the pair's direction. The magic technique for using spiritual qi to track people was a very common method used by Foundation establishment cultivators. However, most people could only sense the marker from a few tens of kilometers away. Han Li, on the other hand, practiced the Great Development technique and could faintly track it down from over 50 kilometers away, a feat that was truly astonishing. This caused Han Li to greatly look forward to practicing the second layer of the Great Development technique. After a moment, Han Li stood on the divine wind boat and coldly looked down at an unremarkable courtyard that was about 100 meters wide. There were 3 small, half-worn rooms in the courtyard. Standing on the small, pure white jade-like boat, Han Li didn't recklessly descend. Instead, he remained calm and silent as if he were thinking about something. In the end, Han Li took a light step, and the small boat immediately fell from the sky like a shooting star. But when he was about 15 meters away from the floor, the magic tool suddenly came to a stop. Han Li's body moved, and he lightly stepped off the magic tool and landed in the small courtyard. At the same time, he beckoned toward the sky. In response, the small boat shrank and flew into Han Li's hand. This series of events was as smooth and nimble as flowing water. The slightest of noise couldn't be heard. Then, like a demon, he stood in front of the middle room and calmly probed the room for activity with his spiritual sense. Han Li clearly felt that within the room, there were 2 masses of spiritual qi, faintly accompanied by traces of his own spiritual qi. As expected, after Han Li's spiritual sense entered the room, he clearly heard a young woman's voice. "Grandpa, aren't our actions going to anger him? If that person truly finds us, will the excuses we prepared work?" The young girl's voice was filled with worry. It seemed that Han Li had left a deep and powerful impression on her. "Humph, you foolish girl. How could he actually find us relying on just a bit of spiritual qi? Your grandpa ate more hardships than you ate meals. Threats, deliberately menacing words, your grandpa has seen them all. I'm not convinced his words were true. Furthermore, even if he can activate the magic technique, since we are separated by such a far distance, that Foundation establishment cultivator won't be able to accurately sense us. If he goes to the East District, then this person will truly have to go search for us." After a cold snort, the old man chided the young girl. "Since it is like that, why didn't we leave Yuejing during the night? All we did was move to the West District," the young girl retorted, unconvinced. "You still don't understand. What I said earlier was only your grandpa's guess. As to whether or not it's true, that is unclear. If I guessed correctly, naturally we won't have to face his threats and will be free to leave to a different place. But he is nonetheless a Foundation establishment cultivator. Perhaps he will be able to trace us from afar with his magic technique. If we ran away from Yuejing and he found us, we would have no excuses. But moving to the West District isn't the same as running away, so we can just casually use an excuse to explain ourselves." The old man doted on this young girl very much, so he gave her a detailed explanation. Grandpa, you are truly cunning. However, I don't think that person seems to be of the despicable sort. Is it necessary for us to hide from him? According to my thoughts, Wouldn't simply exchanging the Taoist book with him give us great benefits? In any case, this Taoist book is far too profound for us to understand it. The young girl giggled and said this without care. Humph, the world is dangerous. That is just wishful thinking. By conventional morals, everyone would honorably trade openly, and there would be no reason to scheme. You have yet to realize that for fair dealings to exist, they require both sides to have similar strengths. If one side is strong and one side is weak, how can that be considered fair? Besides, although that Taoist book is of no value to us, it could perhaps be a treasure in his hands. After possessing the treasure, he might immediately exterminate us. Your grandpa has seen this on many occasions throughout his life. How could I possibly trust him? After all, the difference in cultivation between him and us is far too great. He could exterminate without expending the slightest of strength. As the old man said this, his voice became darker. It was clear he was helpless against the reality that his life was in someone else's hands. Grandpa, don't be discouraged. Didn't you say that although that person appears young, he's likely an old monster that lived an unknown number of years? When the young girl saw this, she hastily consoled him. But at this moment, a cold voice from their most feared person suddenly came from outside the room. What? How am I anything like an old monster? As the complexion of the grandparent-grandchild pair greatly changed, the originally tightly closed door silently opened and gave way to Han Li, who calmly walked in. After he entered the room, Han Li bluntly sat in the host's seat and then wordlessly looked at the two with an extremely calm expression. Chapter 296 Formal Apprenticeship. Chapter 296 Formal Apprenticeship. What old monster? Nobody said those words. With a greatly changed complexion, the young girl pushed this forward with a strong smile and hastily lowered her head, not daring to meet his gaze. Han Li chuckled and didn't bother with the young lady. Instead, he coldly looked at the old man. The old man appeared to have lost his head from fear. He truly didn't know how much Han Li heard from the previous conversation, so he couldn't help but inwardly complain without end. Now, he didn't dare to speak his originally prepared excuse. I didn't think that senior would arrive so quickly. This junior believed senior would arrive in a few hours at the very least. Let junior take out that book for senior. Without a choice, the old man could only cope with all his might against Han Li's unfriendly appearance. In a quick-witted move, he immediately mentioned the Taoist book in hopes that he could calm Han Li's anger. Fine, take it out. After staring at the old man with a sword-like gaze, Han Li eventually said this with a cold tone. This caused the old man to recover his wits. It seemed the other party wouldn't immediately vent his anger. The old man hastily agreed and walked to the neighboring room. When the young girl saw this, she moved her legs, also wanting to follow the old man, but the old man stopped her with his gaze. What kind of joke was this? If both people went to the neighboring room, then wouldn't they be deliberately angering the other party? It would cause Han Li to believe they were thinking of playing some sort of trick. The old man completely threw these impractical thoughts out, fearing Han Li would have a misunderstanding. The young girl could only remain in the room with a pout. She stood silently in her original place, keeping Han Li company. The old man's movements were very quick. In the blink of an eye, he walked over with a shabby wooden box that seemed to contain the Taoist book. Senior, the chi restraining technique we use as well as the other teachings of the books are within. Please take a look and see whether it has any use to Senior. The old man walked several steps toward Han Li and proclaimed this with a respectful appearance. He gently opened the wooden box, revealing a slightly blackened yellow leather book, and handed it over to Han Li. From a look, one could tell this book came from an ancient era. Han Li narrowed his eyes, and after looking at the book in the old man's hands several times, he nodded his head and received it. Although this book had changed color due to the passing of time, when Han Li touched the cover, it felt exquisitely smooth. Furthermore, it seemed extremely durable. It appeared that this book wasn't made from common materials, and was instead made from the hide of some sort of demonic beast. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to remain intact for such a long time. Han Li lightly stroked the book for a moment, and after muttering to himself, he slowly flipped a page. After a few general looks, Han Li wrinkled his brow. When he opened this book, extremely unfamiliar and ancient characters entered his view. Han Li was certain he didn't recognize the marking of these characters. He also hadn't seen such markings from the collection at Yellow Maple Valley. Although he didn't recognize them, Han Li didn't waste his time, and he quickly turned through the pages. In the last 2 pages of the book, he discovered a set of nameless chants that appeared to have been added by someone. The characters used in this set of incantations were ancient characters more commonly used in the cultivation world, allowing him to easily read them. Han Li knew in his heart that this was the chi restraining technique, so he took the liberty to analyze it. After the time it took to eat a meal, Han Li slowly closed the book, and his face wore a thoughtful expression. Pudong, Pudong. The old man to the side felt his heart violently beat, but he didn't dare to breath loudly. He knew this moment would decide the lives of him and his granddaughter, since Han Li would be revealing how he intended to treat the two of them. Han Li didn't pay attention to the old man's inwardly nervous attitude. Instead, he calmly took out a jade box from his storage pouch and properly put the book inside. Then he turned his face towards the old man and said indifferently, "I will take this book. Tell me right now what items you two want in exchange for it. No matter what, I will fulfill your requests to the best of my ability." Han Li's voice wasn't loud, but when the old man and the young girl heard those words, it was as if they heard the sweet sounds of nature. At this moment, the two knew that not only were their lives saved, but there were also benefits to be had. They couldn't help but reveal pleasant surprise. "Senior, could you let us discuss it for a bit?" Now that the crisis had passed, the old man couldn't help but want to maximize the benefits from this exchange, and immediately asked Han Li with a smile. Before Han Li arrived, the pair had been afraid they would be exterminated absolutely, without any items being exchanged. But now that they heard Han Li's question, they were naturally caught unprepared. Furthermore, now that he realized Han Li wasn't a merciless, nasty character, the old man gathered the courage to ask that question. "Do as you wish, but you mustn't take too long." Because Han Li had acquired a set of very useful secret arts and a mysterious ancient book, he was in a good mood. He allowed them this chance to talk without paying much mind. "Many thanks for Senior's great favor. We will only take a short amount of time," the old man exclaimed with great joy. He immediately brought the young woman outside the room, and the two started to mutter in soft voices. When Han Li saw this, he faintly smiled. Although he could easily exterminate the two, Han Li wasn't such an evil and pointlessly vicious character. If he didn't need to, he wouldn't go back on his word. After a short moment, the old man and the young woman walked over with strange expressions on their faces, as if they were a bit worried. When Han Li saw them, he was a bit puzzled, but he still asked, "You two have decided?" "Senior, we have finished discussing. This one's granddaughter doesn't want any worldly possessions. Instead, we wish for Senior to fulfill our bold request." After a moment of hesitation, he said this with clenched teeth, slightly surprisingly Han Li. "What's this request?" Han Li wrinkled his brow and unhurriedly asked. He didn't know why, but at this moment, Han Li suddenly had a feeling that something troublesome was going to happen to him. After some more hesitation, the old man revealed a helpless expression and continued vaguely. Actually, this one's granddaughter greatly admires Senior's deep and profound cultivation and techniques. She wishes to become Senior's disciple and is willing to serve as Senior's attendant. As the sincere wish of this small old man and his granddaughter, we hope Senior will be able to take her as a disciple." Just as the old man finished stuttering these words, the clever young girl immediately paid her respects in front of Han Li and kowtowed, knocking her head loudly on the floor. Han Li simply had not predicted this would happen. After a moment of great surprise, he didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. To have him accept a disciple, was this a joke? He was still trembling from fear in face of the cultivation world and was never sure whether he'd be able to defend himself. Now, he had to bring something to weigh him down. He certainly couldn't agree to this matter. Regardless, Han Li had to return to the main topic on hand. He could tell that the girl's aptitude shouldn't be poor, even if he hadn't carefully examined it yet. Otherwise, she shouldn't have been able to reach the 6th layer at such a young age. When Han Li was at that age, the only reason he had reached that stage was because he had the assistance of an insane amount of medicine pills. From this, it would be a pity for this young girl to spend her life muddling through starting line of the cultivation world. Although he couldn't take this young girl as a disciple, he could still introduce her to a master. He actually found the rare mischievous streak in her quite agreeable. He clearly remembered that the small old man, Senior Martial Brother Ma, had yet to take in a disciple. Furthermore, Senior Martial Brother Ma had once angrily complained that ever since Han Li left the 100 Medicine Garden, the old man had to personally look after the medicine garden when he could otherwise be taking care of more important tasks. Had the small old man known Han Li would leave the garden, he would have taken in an obedient disciple. This young girl before him appeared exceptionally intelligent. If her aptitude truly wasn't lacking, then there was no harm in introducing her to Senior Marshal Brother Ma as a potential disciple. As for whether Senior Marshal Brother Ma would be satisfied in taking in this young girl as a disciple, that had nothing to do with Han Li. With this thought, Han Li revealed a thoughtful appearance and caused the old man and the young girl to believe he was truly thinking of whether to accept her as a disciple, leaving them with excitement. "Come over here, let me look at your spiritual roots." After some contemplation, Han Li waved to the girl and calmly said this. "Yes, Senior." The girl appeared extremely clever, and after respectfully answering, she nimbly walked in front of Han Li and took the initiative to hand over her slender, flawless white wrist, revealing a slight bit of shyness. Han Li lightly grabbed the young girl's jade wrist with his right hand and started to slowly circulate spiritual qi throughout her body. Not long after, he let go. "Dual spiritual roots, truly good aptitude," Han Li muttered as he stared at the young girl's face. When the young woman and the old man heard Han Li's words, joy bubbled up from their faces, and they believed that Han Li was about to accept her. But Han Li continued, suddenly saying, "Unfortunately, I don't take disciples. Otherwise, with your aptitude, I would definitely have accepted you." Han Li's words caused the grandparent-grandchild pair to feel as if cold water was being poured over their heads. They couldn't help but blankly stare.